across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good Monday morning to you. This is Talk with the Home of Common Sense, and I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Very much appreciate you joining me. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, really appreciate you taking the time. So much to talk about. If you miss anything on the show, miss anything on stonking interviews last week, do go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Really easy to find. If you hit subscribe, then you'll never have to miss a thing, and I can stop nagging you about it, basically. Coming up in this hour, I think we were all expecting we were going to be talking about what is happening with that ultimatum from Donald Trump to the Iranian regime about, reopen that Strait of Hormuz by UK time midnight tonight, or going to obliterate your energy supplies, starting with the biggest one, and of course the threat of retaliation from Iran. All bets off on a massive escalation of the Iranian or the Middle East war. But no, a lot of the focus now is back home, and it's not just on that Cobra meeting the Prime Minister is going to have this afternoon about energy prices and fuel prices and food prices and everything else going up. It's about the very, very, very basic stuff. It is whether or not we are safe in our local communities. And the reality is, for an awful lot of people of particular faith, they are not. One faith in particular is the Jewish faith. And we saw that horrific attack in the early hours of this morning on 4 Jewish ambulances in North London, in Golders Green. Those ambulances are part of basically an emergency volunteer paid for by charitable donation service. And yes, that arson attack on those ambulances takes those ambulances out. And no, they are not just used by Jewish people. They are open to anyone in the local community, much like, say, St John's Ambulance Brigade would be used by anyone in the local community or at an event. And no, people wouldn't justify an attack on St John's ambulances because of some policy or some action by a government in a faraway land. You see, because that would be weird, and that's just as weird here. But police say they are investigating. There are obviously footage of 3 suspects arriving at the ambulance site right by a synagogue, which has good CCTV. They have to have good CCTV. They have to have good security because of the spate of attacks, in particular in the wake of that fatal attack, 2 people dying in the Manchester synagogue attack last year. But we've already seen the claims of false flags. I mean, all of that nonsense. It's just painful to see that reaction. The Prime Minister has said, the usual stuff you would expect, talking about how this is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic Arson attack. He says, my thoughts with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to this horrific news. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with information must come forward to the police. He's also said it's really important that we all stand together. Well, Prime Minister, I hate to tell you, I'm not shocked by this anti-Semitic arson attack. And while my thoughts are with the Jewish community waking up to it, I know that anti-Semitism actually does have a place in our society. Why? Well, because the left of the Labour Party, under the man who you worked for in the shadow cabinet, brought it back big time on the left in this country. It had pretty much disappeared, I would say, for most of us in this country over the last 40, 50 years. And you allowed it to come back. You were happy to try and campaign for Jeremy Corbyn to be elected Prime Minister of this country. Thank God you failed. When you became Labour leader, you said you would tackle the issue of anti-Semitism, not just in the Labour Party, but in wider society. So what have you done? Well, you've allowed marches which are blatantly, openly anti-Semitic, not anti-Zionist, openly anti-Semitic on the streets of London for the past few years, every fortnight. You, as a former Director of Public Prosecutions, should know that maybe it's a good idea to prosecute people who make threats against a particular faith, to perhaps discourage that from happening again. And yet, you're apparently shocked by an anti-Semitic arson attack on ambulances, but there has been no prosecution at any point in the few years since, and it's, 4 years now, since men in broad daylight, on camera, drove down the road, by the way, through Golders Green, just a few hundred yards away from where this ambulance attack happened, with their pro-Palestinian flags, shouting about wanting to rape the wives and daughters of Jews. OK, those were my friends. Those are my daughter's friends. I took that personally. And for some reason, you and the Metropolitan Police and the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who by the way, is also talking about this being a cowardly attack this morning, you didn't think it was necessary for those men to be prosecuted. It took about a year or so for them to even be arrested. No charges brought. So don't claim you're deeply shocked by an attack on Jewish ambulances, because no one is shocked anymore. What is most worrying is that this has become all too familiar and all too predictable. So what are you going to do about it? Because so far it ain't been good enough, Prime Minister. Any society that allows anti-Semitism to grow and spore is a society that is on its last legs. It is as simple as that. This is the canary in the coal mine about what is really at the heart of the rotten heart of our society right now. I would want to hear your thoughts on all of this as well. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us on 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate, message. And of course, I'd love to get your calls on all the topics we're talking about. You want to talk about wider stuff in Iran, that's fine. Absolutely happy to take your calls on any topic. But this morning, I just think we need to take the people like the Prime Minister and the London Mayor, and Zach Polanski of the Greens, to task for their, frankly, risible claims about being shocked and horrified by this attack. Joining me for conversation today, I'm delighted to say, is Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Good morning to you. Were you deeply shocked by this arson attack?
Not even remotely. It's sort of par for the course now. But, so many things that once upon a time would have been sort of wall-to-wall news stories for weeks just aren't anymore. And this is not to take away from this particular story, but the number of people that are stabbed to death in our capital, the number of children that are stabbed to death these days, random knife attacks by people and of unknown origin, usually given us somewhere in Wales, and it's just sort of taken as that's happened again. That thing that the politicians say is never happening again, it's happened again. Rapes in broad daylight of young women and children and that sort of thing, and it always turns out, again, that thing that doesn't happen, it's happened again. And here we have a clearly anti-Semitic attack, blatantly anti-Semitic attack, and it's that's happened again. That thing that we're told doesn't happen, that's happened again as well.
We should come together.
I think that's just the thing. Now, we are so used to these things that in a high-trust society you shouldn't tolerate even once, becoming regular occurrences, that people do just go, well, that is how things are now, and we've come to accept the fact. You gave the example of the men who were driving through Golders Green and were never charged, even though it was all on camera. We all saw what happened.
We know they committed a crime.
We've all seen it again and again and again. And the fact of the matter is, as you say, no charges brought, and that again is partly what people just come to expect. Maybe there'll be an investigation. Maybe there won't. You might get a crime number.
But again, what does that tell people? And
even when they are convicted, suspended sentence or 6 months or something like that, and you think, right, okay, so that thing that doesn't happen, that thing that we say about people not being prosecuted, that happened again as well. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's the continuous... We're told over and over again, no, this is... You're living, in fact, in the safest time you've ever lived in. Crime is down. Everything's magnificent. And just ignore these things that keep on popping up, because it's not really that big a deal. It might not even be happening. And maybe it's, I don't know, Russian bots on the internet or fake news, or maybe it's the far right. And remember, you have to be careful about the far right, because if the far right get in, they might go around with knives, stabbing people and attacking Jewish people. Oh, wait, no, that's currently what's happening. That's the hilarity of this situation. It is farcical.
Exactly.
It's not even shocking. It's just farce.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Zach Polanski, the Green Party leader, again, I'm thinking he's very much part of the problem. He wrote this morning, horrified by the anti-Semitic attack in our city. Anti-Semitism is vile and has no place here. Solidarity with the Jewish community in Golders Green and with our communities across the country who will be feeling this today. It's very interesting that even the first few responses to him after he posted that with this, this could be a false flag, as in Jews have done this deliberately to make it look like it would have been, anti-Semites.
Those sneaky Jews.
Those sneaky Jews.
That's what that is.
We shouldn't rule out the possibility that this could be a false flag attack. That's from someone calling themselves Humanity First. False flag screams out, let's have an actual independent investigation. But I mean, again, quite a lot of people also pointing out that Zach Polanski's deputy, Mohsen Ali, who basically celebrated the October 7th attacks and called it a fight back.
Yeah, I mean the Green Party.
Called it a fight back.
The Green Party is. I mean, The Green Party is very dangerous because it's a chameleon of a party. Nobody actually knows exactly what it stands for because it stands for so many different things to different people. And it hides behind the veneer of respectability, which is that for a very long time now, middle-class white people have gone, oh, I like the environment, so as a protest vote, I'll vote Green because I can't vote for those nasty Tories and that beastly Blair or whoever it is that's in charge now. Well, I won't vote for them either. So people vote Green, and they've been able to get a sort of a groundswell of support, and they've used that veneer of respectability to hide really awful sectarian politics that they push elsewhere in the country, and that's how you get that kind of situation.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Look, well, we're going to go live to Gideon Falter, the campaign against anti-Semitism, live in Golders Green in just a couple of moments. We'll skip lots of the top guests, but before we do, I also just want to talk, because this will be related. Everything is all stirred up, awful Israel after October 7th. Bearing in mind those marches that became this, I think people genuinely were concerned about babies in Gaza for some of them for a while. Yeah. But basically, a march that was organised on the day while women were still being gang raped and brutalised and murdered, and hostages were still being taken. The first pro-Palestinian march was organised while that was still. I mean, the bodies weren't even buried. Come on, give me a break. We know what that march is all about. And again, Israel. I am fully behind Israel, not because I'm being paid my 7,000 shekels. And again, I've said again and again, could I please be paid by money in pounds? It's the exchange rate, 7,000 shekels. It's not worth the same amount of money. About $2.5 grand.
We're
no
both
use
really
to me.
down. HMRC's knocking on my door going, well, where are they? Come on.
I'm literally waiting for my checks. And from Big Oil and Big Pharma, you are late with your checks, guys. Yeah. I mean, again, this is the nonsense that you get. I'm sad with Israel because it's the only democracy in the Middle East. Yeah. And I think Israel, again, and the US, they've got very different war aims at the current time. And in terms of the need to stand up to Iran. And what we saw over the weekend with that, thankfully, we think, failed missile attack on the Diego Garcia base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, many thousands of miles away, that was the proof, and Israel has been saying this for a while, that Iran is developing not just nuclear weapons. Some idiot on Radio 4 the other day saying, "Oh no, but they got they don't have nuclear weapons," and it's like they're not developing them. If you've got a huge amount of uranium enriched to 60%, it needs to be 3% to have a nuclear power station. Yeah. 60% means you're trying to make a nuclear weapon. And frankly, whether it's 2 years away or 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry, I don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. Yeah. But the fact they've also got ballistic missiles that are basically long range, basically twice the range of what we thought they had, which means they can hit London, they can hit Berlin, they can hit Paris. They are a danger to us. Oh, but they're not threatening us. Really? Really, we're the little Satan, along with Israel. We share that title. Great Satan is America. We're the little Satan. They absolutely the thought process, the ideology of the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. The Iranian regime is basically an Islamic caliphate stretching across pretty much the whole of Asia and Europe, and we must be destroyed. And anyone who will not submit must die. That's the end of the matter. Nothing to discuss. I don't know what people don't get about this. Yeah, and
the thing is always with this, and you hear people saying, well, there's not enough evidence to show that Iran was at that sort of point yet. You don't wait for them to get to that. This is the thing I don't understand about so many people who clearly don't understand how conflicts work or wars work. You don't wait until they get the bomb to then attack them. You do it before. If anything,
that's why we can't do anything about North Korea.
Exactly. If anything, we waited far too long to get to this situation. But the other thing is, it's not just nuclear warheads you can put on the front of these things. Exactly. Nerve agents, all sorts of other things. That was the big takeaway. Always people are comparing this to Iraq, saying, well, it's the same thing. The big takeaway from Iraq is, okay, Saddam Hussein did not have nuclear weapons. He didn't have those weapons of mass destruction. Do you know who did? Colonel Gaddafi, who turned around to the European Union and went, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about this, guys, so please take my stockpile of weapons that I've been developing. And everybody in the West went, wait, what? You were developing these things? And it was just because those guys didn't have it. Doesn't mean that other people aren't. And the Iranians, crucially, have not been shy about this. No. They're the ones saying, yes, that's what we're doing. That is what our civilian program is for a bomb. Given how brutal they are with, an 18-year-old teenage girl who takes her hijab off or whatever, I'm pretty sure they're not going to show us any mercy. Now, Trump's given this ultimatum to Iran. You open the Strait of Hormuz. By the way, this is the day after. He gave this ultimatum on Saturday. On the day before, he was talking about winding things down. The war, basically. We were looking at him basically
finding an off-ramp, from this war. But he basically, as the oil price rises, is hitting the pocketbooks of American voters ahead of those midterm elections. But he gave an ultimatum to Iran: reopen the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and gas comes, by basically midnight tonight London time or UK time, or he says, I'm going to obliterate Iranian energy plants. I've seen some nonsense about how this would be a war crime. It's like rubbish. He's using his energy plants to fund his... I mean, come on, people. Get with the programme. These people, trust me, these people would have tied Winston Churchill's hands behind his back if they had the option. Iran has basically said, well, we'll retaliate against not just Israel, but also Arab countries that are US allies, which is most of them, and we'll send oil prices soaring. So they've got 2 or 3, of lines of attack. One, just the economies of the West, knowing perfectly well how utterly pathetic and weak we are, particularly in Europe, where we have these mad net zero policies, but also 2, taking on Arab countries who've been playing a bit of a game to basically just trying to cope with Iran for the recent years. But we've got to think about those countries, not just their energy plants, which is their only income. Ain't no tourism now, but also the energy plants that power the desalination plants, bearing in mind most countries in the Arab world, 60 to 90% of their water comes from desalinated seawater. So you are looking at, being 3 days away from absolute societal breakdown. Forget food. People don't have water. You are looking at absolute chaos in those countries, and in Israel as well, also relying on desalination. We are looking at a very, very worrying time.
We are, but I don't think the Americans would actually make that threat if they hadn't, in their opinion, neutralised a lot of Iran's ability to launch missiles and drones. And the one takeaway from this conflict so far, lots of people have been saying very justifiably, there's no plan for regime change or
well, there
how
shouldn't
to do
be. I think that's a perfectly legitimate position.
But in terms of their military objectives of being able to massively reduce the number of drones and missiles Iran can fire off, it has actually been very successful, because the problem is Iran has a limited stockpile, and a limited number of... So does the West. But Iran has smaller reserves, and they also have a limited number of areas from where they can fire. Once you fire one, everyone knows where you're firing from, at which point the United States and Israel go, thanks very much, we're going to blow that up. And this is the issue that Iran has. It can fire off as many of these things as it wants whilst its stocks are there, but the second it does that, everybody else can then go, oh, that's where that's coming from. So, it is obviously a huge risk in sort of poking that bear, but I think the United States wouldn't actually consider making that move unless they thought we've pretty much got this mapped out. But this is where
you worry with Donald Trump, whether you're a fan or you're not a fan. You've got to accept he shoots you on the hip, he tweets things, and he says things off the cuff, which can end up, being rather worrying. That said, he's also made an awful lot of threats to Russia, which he's not carried through. So again, if you give an ultimatum like Obama's red line in the sand in Syria, if you give an ultimatum. Same as parenting. Don't give an ultimatum you're not willing to follow through on. Again, you can't negotiate with lunatics, with a death wish. That is the problem. What do you make of this missile? Well, 2 missiles apparently on the Chagos military base. And again, we're not involved in any offensive war. Oh look. Cyprus, RAF base there attacked, and Chagos military base attacked. But we only found out about this missile attack. Thankfully, both missiles thwarted. Well, one fell, I think, at the sea, one was taken down. 30 hours after the attack. And that was through the US media, from leaks from the Pentagon. We were not told about it by the British MOD or by Number 10. Do you think that we would actually have ever learned about it if it wasn't for that leak to the US media? Well,
if they continue to fire at us and keep missing, then maybe not. But eventually something might actually hit. And then, yes, eventually people would have found out about this, because, British soldiers do leak just like American ones do as well. Eventually somebody would have found this out.
Should we not be told about it in the first place?
Possibly. I think that the government is very keen to sort of dampen down any suggestion that it is going to get involved. And I've said this before, this isn't because of any sort of moral principle, it's because it understands we can't actually really do anything of use, and we can't even really properly defend ourselves.
There's no principle and there's no strategy, there's no tactic here from Keir Starmer. It's just we don't really have the ability, and he's so worried about these local elections coming. He's trying to save his own skin. Forget Labour, he only cares about himself, and he's worried about that threat from the Greens. And if it looks really, really bad on the results from May the 7th. He knows. Well, let's face it. Most people think he's out either way.
And I'm sorry, but that very
fact,
that
is deciding Britain's foreign policy. Now.
That is. I'm sorry, but people really need to wake up about this. This is disgraceful. It's not democratic. It's people coming from overseas and imposing their own, particular political ideas on a country that has potentially nothing to do with these things. It shouldn't be allowed to be happening. And I really do think people need to sit back and go, actually, what is it? Put it this way: if Britain is not going to be a great imperial power, flexing its muscles around the world, which many of these people don't think it should be, what business have we got letting those people decide our foreign policy? Because Britain will get involved in those conflicts overseas, not necessarily in a good way.
And again, often we don't have a choice.
Exactly.
But there we are. 10:22 is time. Love to hear your thoughts. Want to hear your thoughts on that? Supposedly, as Keir Starmer says, deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack on 4 Jewish ambulances in North London. Those ambulances, by the way, are available to everyone in the local community, whether Jewish or of any other faith or of no faith. Very big. Those numbers are publicly available online for people to call. Police investigating that. But are you shocked? Are you shocked about that? Because that seems to be what the Prime Minister seems to think. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Also, love to hear your thoughts on where we are in terms of that ultimatum from the American president as well. What do you think is going to happen? What do you want to happen? Up next, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to take your calls. We're also going to be here from Gideon Falter from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. He's live from Golders Green, where that attack happened. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:25 is the time. Let's have a little watch and a listen to Keir Starmer talking about that attack on ambulances in North London.
Well, this is a horrific anti-Semitic attack. And of course, my thoughts, I think all of our thoughts, will be with those in the vicinity, the residents who are understandably very concerned, a Jewish community across the country deeply concerned. I've already been in touch with community leaders this morning and will continue to do so during the day. But anti-Semitism has no place in our society, and it's really important that we all stand together at a moment like this.
Well, let's get the reaction to that statement from Keir Starmer and to this horrific events overnight where 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish emergency service run as a charity and funded by local people in North London has been set on fire in what has been dubbed an anti-Semitic attack outside a London synagogue. Gideon Falter is live there on the scene. He's Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. Good morning to you, Gideon.
Good morning, Julia. Hi.
Hi. Well, it's not that good a morning. Look, I know that part of the world very, very well. Now, just make it really clear to people, because my God, the amount of nonsense being spouted online right now. It's a false flag alert. Most people though are going, oh, well, why do the Jews get their own ambulances? What about if me as a non-Jew, if I called? Can you clear up what this service is, how it's funded, and who it serves?
This is a service run by the Jewish community, funded by donations from within the Jewish community. It's run and staffed by volunteers, and it serves absolutely everybody in the North London area. It runs in conjunction with London Ambulance Service, with the NHS, to make sure that when someone needs help in this area, they get service much faster, life-saving help, that they need within minutes, including from the London Ambulance Service and from Asylum, which is the charities whose ambulances have just been burned to the ground. It is absolutely revolting and so typical, sadly, to see that we've got people already piling in from the far left and the far right. Yeah. The far left saying this has got to be the work of Israeli secret agents who are just trying to make sure that Britain looks bad. And then we've got the far right saying how disgusting that the Jews have an ambulance service. Yeah. This is something that the Jewish community has been doing to try and strengthen the ambulance response for the whole area, for people of all faiths and none.
Indeed, again, a service run by Jews, but not a service for Jews, rather crucially. Let's talk about what actually happened.
Absolutely.
Look, this is an attack on vehicles, not an attack on people, so thank God we're not seeing any loss of life, as we saw the Manchester synagogue attack in Heaton Park last year, where 2 people lost their lives. But these are 4 ambulances that are stationed in a residential street next to a synagogue. Obviously, the CCTV footage that we have seen on the news of the perpetrators arriving, setting the arson attack and running away, that is provided from the CCTV provided by the synagogue, and that's security. Now, you know, even the Prime Minister is saying it's an anti-Semitic attack. I suppose on a technicality, they'd say a suspected anti-Semitic attack. But there are already some claims on Telegram and elsewhere of an Iran-linked group apparently claiming this. Do we know anything about the perpetrators yet?
We don't really know anything conclusively, no. What we currently know is that there was an attack by 3 people. We've seen that on CCTV. It has all of the hallmarks of an anti-Semitic attack. It seems very unlikely that somebody would just turn up and randomly decide to go and burn down 4 ambulances. This is not something that's happening at London Ambulance Service stations. It's just happened to Hatzalah. And I think when you look at what Iran is doing in the UK, you know, we've just had people charged with spying for Iran, targeting Jewish institutions and Jewish individuals. This is obviously a really easy target. This is a set of ambulances that are parked out front next to a synagogue, which are active 24/7 for the community, and they've obviously picked a moment where all 4 ambulances weren't on call. Yeah. They were all parked up, they've come along and they've set them ablaze. You know, we're now hearing from politicians, and in fact there's a bit of a commotion just over there now as one of them arrives. You know, we're hearing that they're going to yet again do everything in their power to help the Jewish community. We're hearing Sadiq Khan say that he's going to step up patrols in the area. What's he think he's going to catch? People coming back to burn the ashes? Yeah. This is something which has been going absolutely absolutely out of control for years now. We've had everything from hate marches to hate preachers tolerated in this country, to the extent that we no longer recognise the face of Britain. This is no longer the decent, tolerant country that we all thought we had. This is the reality of Britain at the moment, and we need to get back to a place where there is law and order, and that involves not just the politicians, not just the police forces, not just the various regulators and institutions that are supposed to keep us safe. It also involves the British people, because pretty much everyone right now will have someone on their timelines spouting some conspiracy-obsessed nonsense about Jews, Zionists, Israelis, and people need to stand up and say, I don't agree with this, I won't stand for this, I'm unfollowing you, this is why, and then block them. Because until we start getting that kind of response from ordinary, decent Brits, we all need to fight this as a society, and it's just going to get worse and worse. Where do we go from here? The burning of ambulances.
Well, indeed. And again, and this is the thing, when the Prime Minister claims that he is shocked, you sort of wonder, well, you know, I wasn't remotely shocked. I mean, by this particular incident, there's always shock. But you know, we've seen this rise, as you say, in hate marches and hate speech. Some of the stuff on my timeline, I'm sure on your timeline, absolutely horrific, and such blatant anti-Semitism, nothing to do with Israel and war policy and the like. But it's interesting, Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he said this is a cowardly attack on the Jewish community. He said he's in close contact with the police. He says, Londoners will never be cowed by this kind of hatred and intimidation. Now, he didn't call it an anti-Semitic attack. He says Londoners will never be cowed. But the reality is we have had hatred and intimidation allowed on London streets, I mean, pretty much, you know, every week since October the 7th. You know, and it's just gone on, and very little has been done about it. Very few prosecutions. I mentioned at the top of the hour. I mean, it still blows my mind that those men who drove down with their pro-Palestinian flags down the Vinci Road, down through Golders Green and elsewhere, through prominently Jewish areas, shouting they were going to rape Jewish wives and daughters, never been prosecuted. How can the London Mayor, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, how can he claim, you know, that Londoners will never be cowed when people are allowed to do that with impunity?
This, unfortunately, is the kind of nonsense that people say after an attack like this. They say that we will not be cowed. There is no place in society for this. There is clearly a place in society for this because it keeps happening. Yeah. And clearly this is going to keep happening time and time again. I don't want to try and guess what the next disgusting depth we're going to sink to is, but the burning of ambulances needs to be a pretty urgent wake-up call for our politicians. You know, Sadiq Khan has consistently, I think, you know, disappointed Londoners. We do surveys of the British Jewish community. He does not seem to have a lot of faith within the Jewish community of the UK. But, you know, we would like to see something from him that is actually something beyond words of reassurance. We've never seen him on our marches against anti-Semitism. We've seen the police describe these hate marches through our capital consistently described as peaceful marches. Yep. I was threatened with arrest for being openly Jewish in the vicinity of a march. This is the kind of reality that Jewish Londoners have to face. And if you could see around me right now, you probably can see the Jewish community is out here today. People are saying, what has it come to? This is an ambulance service that was organized from the heart of the Jewish community to try and look after everybody. The synagogue right next door has had to turn away people coming for prayer today because the synagogue has had to close its doors as well. This fire is not just about these ambulances, it's not just about these perpetrators, it's about our society and what is going to be done now.
And a huge number, I know so many Jewish people getting in touch with me about how scared they are, people talking about, even in the time of war, feeling that they would be safer moving to Israel, which is a terrible, terrible indictment of our society. But the point is, it shouldn't just be Jewish people who are afraid. We should all be afraid of that. As I said earlier, this is a growth of anti-Semitism, what's going on. This is the canary in the coal mine for a society that is rotten, and everyone needs to speak out. And I just think the time has long gone for anyone to be silent. Pick a side, speak loud and proud, defend people, and again, defend people against anti-Muslim hatred as well. We should all do, any kind of racism or anti-intolerance of religion. People need to be able to be free in our society to show who they are and what they believe publicly, as long as they are not a danger or a threat or harassing other people. That should be the hallmark of British society, and right now it is not feeling like that for many Jewish people. Gideon Falter, you do fantastic work at the campaign against anti-Semitism. Thank you very much for joining us. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has also been speaking. So we'll find out what he had to say. We're going to go to a quick break right now. We're going to be talking to the former government advisor on political violence, disruption and extremism. That's Lord Walney. Up next, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:37 is the time. Let's go to my next guest now, Lord Walney. He's a former government advisor on political violence, disruption and extremism. And in a previous life was John Woodcock, a former Labour MP. Very good morning to you, Lord Walney.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, we'd actually, interestingly, we already, wanted to speak to you about what is going on, with Iran and implications and things there, and then this horrific anti-Semitic attack in North London. Thankfully, no human beings, no people actually hurt, as we saw the horrific attack on the Manchester synagogue last year. But big concerns the Jewish community in North London, which of course is the largest Jewish community in the country. What's your response?
It's hideous, and it's a sign of exactly what happens if you allow this intimidation to be tolerated. The Jewish people have felt under siege effectively since the 7th of October. There has been levels of anti-Semitic violence and hatred that has been off the charts, and it's really important that people reflect now just on the consequences of turning a blind eye to what they feel might be the lower ends of intimidation, and that in some way can be justified because, oh well, there is really bad stuff happening in the Middle East, and maybe these Jewish people think that it's okay. And you have had attempts, for example, to dismiss the violence, the vandalism against Gale's Bakery, which has been targeted just because it happens to be owned by a Jewish Brit. To say,
no, it was set up by an Israeli baker, and it's now owned by a company that does deals with Israeli arms firms. I mean, it's tenuous at best.
Exactly, but you have people who will say, okay, but so that. But that level of value, what else are they supposed to do? Well, what happens if you tolerate that? That you get that escalation, because if it's okay to commit that level of violence or vandalism, who is to say that it's not when it stops, when it's not acceptable? And the next thing is that you get these ambulances run by a Jewish charity being sabotaged, and where next? You have to say that all of this is completely unacceptable, and that we reject it. We'll take action.
But the key thing is, you get the Prime Minister saying it's deeply shocking. It's not deeply shocking. It's entirely predictable. But I think part of the issue here is also not the failure by the police and the authorities and the politicians. Oh, they're happy to clamp down on violence or threats, post Southport, aren't they? But apparently they have no powers whatsoever to direct the police or the courts when it comes to anti-Semitism. But also, is this not also down to by not just politicians, by the BBC, by many other organisations demonising Israel, and then people link up, Israel, Jews, and we just see that basically, the conflagration, these must be exactly the same things, that every Jew has to have exactly the same opinion as Benjamin Netanyahu and is responsible for government policy. But the demonisation of Israel in a way that we haven't seen in the British media or by British charities or British politicians, the demonisation of Iran. I mean, the reaction to Iran, mass slaughtering tens of thousands of young people on their streets for peaceful protest, got basically a sort of a shrug from the same people who've lost their minds for the last few years over Israel trying to take out Hamas in Gaza. I mean, the reality is, this has been allowed to happen, hasn't it?
There is clearly a double standard here, and it has been applied for many, many decades, and it is gratuitous now. I was really struck by something I heard said by Mark Gardner, the head of the Community Security Trust. The fact that the Jewish community has to have that level of security organisation tells a story in itself. But he made the really striking point that if there had been, for example, the recent incident of Iranian spies having been caught targeting Jewish people in Britain, if that had been flipped, and it had been Iranian spies targeting Muslims, the national outrage.
Israeli spies,
Israeli spies targeting Muslims, that would have been off the charts.
Yeah.
People would have lost their mind. But because it's Iran and because it's targeting Jewish people, it's kind of felt, well, it's not. People will say that it's bad, but there is nothing like the same level of outrage, and we have to identify that, I think, encoded double standards, and which has at its heart a level of conscious or unconscious anti-Semitism and bias, and we have to target that as well now.
What about, and I've seen this all over social media as well, people are going to be blaming Muslims, blaming Islam, there'll be a spate of Islamophobic attacks. Now we have this, and we've seen the announcement of this, this new definition of this new czar to tackle the issues of anti-Muslim hostility. But we've already seen that attack on freedom of speech, the criticisms of Nick Timothy, Shadow Justice Secretary for the Tories, with his discussion and criticism of the iftar, the end of the fast during Ramadan in Trafalgar Square, and a mass prayer event. Do you think that when people, is that whataboutery when people talk about that, or I'm being told constantly, but there are far more attacks on Muslims in this country. Islamophobia is, as they call it, a bigger issue than anti-Semitism. But I think I'm pretty accurate in saying that given the relative populations in the hundreds of thousands for Jews and in the millions for Muslims, actually per head of the population, anti-Semitic attacks are far, far, far higher and growing at a faster rate.
Yes, there certainly can be a frustrating level of whataboutery in these conversations, and what you say in terms of the prevalence of attacks and prejudice comparable to the levels of population is right. Now, it is really important that we do identify that there has been also a spike in an anti-Muslim hatred in this country and rising levels of intolerance. But where we go with that and what we do is really important. And actually, I think the debate around this new definition, it was going to be Islamophobia, it's now called anti-Muslim hostility. But you've seen over this last week comments that have been attempted to be shut down. Nick Timothy, many people, including the Prime Minister down, are saying that Nick Timothy should be sacked for saying what he said about the Muslim prayers, which actually, on balance, I don't agree with. I don't think it was a kind of act of domination, that those prayers. I think actually we should be encouraging more worship in public space, as long as it is done in the right way. And I think it's notable that actually Jewish communities have come out and have sort of supported the idea of prayers and iftar. But the key point is, this is an absolutely valid debate to have about the faith of Islam and how it is practiced and its effect on the country. So while I don't think I agreed with Nick on that particular thing he said, the idea that he should be cast out of frontline politics because it is totally absurd. Yeah. And it shows actually why it's so dangerous to be further codifying this idea of anti-Muslim hostility when we already have an environment where people feel that any kind of criticism of Islam or its practices is off limits.
Indeed. Really good to talk. She covered a lot of ground there. Lord Walney, former government advisor on political violence, disruption and extremism. Benedict Spence, just to let you know, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting has, as he'd been speaking at that ambulance station in Golders Green, and he said the London ambulance service, the NHS service, will be providing additional support in Golders Green for the time being, and the government is going to fund the 4 replacement ambulances. He says after what he called the appalling attack on Jewish community ambulances, bearing in mind they are available for everybody in the area whether they are Jewish or not. Benedict, your response?
I think that's the least that they can do to fund
I was going to say I was going to contribute and send money to the charity.
Well, of course, I think many people would do that, but equally, why should they have to? I think because it's a disgraceful
maybe we should just have a decent ambulance service.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful thing. But I just want to sort of pick up on something that Lord Walney said there, which was that he thought that there needs to be more public displays of religion. There are literally hundreds of disused religious buildings in this country. If there's so many people spilling out who need desperately to pray, there are literally hundreds of churches that are disused in this city, thousands across the country.
Well,
they're going to work.
I think there are 60 mosques in London as well.
Go there. There are so many opportunities to go and pray. Half of them are empty the whole time because nobody goes. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. This is a shared secular space. The Battle of Trafalgar had nothing to do with religion. It's a square for that, and it leads up to a national gallery and another museum. Actually, there are so many other places that you can worship.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm with Nick Timothy on it, I have to say. 10:47 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Love to hear your thoughts on everything we're discussing. 0344 499 1000. Up next, former Labour Party, no longer Labour Party spokesman, James Mathewson is going to be in to get his thoughts on how much is our foreign policy basically being directed by Keir Starmer's fear of the Muslim vote going to the Green Party. That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:50 is the time. Sorry we've not been able to get your calls on air. We've obviously wanted to go live to Golders Green, the scene of that anti-Semitic attack on those ambulances. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has been there. As I said to you, he's just said that the London Ambulance Service is going to, the government is going to basically fund 4 replacement services for those burnt out ambulances, which are available to the whole of the local community. Again, maybe the London Ambulance Service just needs to up its game and frankly get to people more sooner, and we wouldn't need charity ambulances to do that job. But Wes Streeting said there's no doubt the attack was intended to strike fear into the heart of the Jewish community. He says the attackers want people to live smaller lives, less Jewish lives, but he says he knows the community won't be cowed by this despicable act of evil. And he said that everyone needs to stand up and speak up across the country and say practical solidarity is the best form of solidarity. I mean, hear to that, certainly, but is it going to be enough? Delighted to say joining us in the studio, rarely actually in the studio, so really good to get him here, James Mathewson. He's a former Labour Party spokesman and no longer with the Labour Party, no longer even a Labour Party member and commentator. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
I'd like to apologise for the fact that apparently your cab driver this morning was a fan of mine.
Yeah, it's
Hello,
a risk.
Mr. Driver.
Always a risk.
Very, very, very traumatic experience for James. James, seriously, it must get your response very briefly to that attack on the ambulances in North London.
Yeah, absolutely despicable, isn't it? And I think Wes Streeting's right. You'll not often hear me say that, but I think he's absolutely right in what he says. And, you know, I think also, Julia, your point about charity as well. You know, they shouldn't have to be picking up the slack in the first place. It's despicable. I'm very much of the opinion usually that of Clement Attlee's line of charity is a cold grey thing, you know, and it shouldn't have to be the thing that provides for people, but thank God it does, thank God these people do.
These basic services should be provided by our taxes, and that's what we pay taxes for. Let's talk about what's happened over the weekend. We've had this ultimatum from Donald Trump to Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, and that's a big development. We're going to wait by midnight tonight. We've got this deadline. Things could get an awful lot worse and escalate an awful lot. But we saw an escalation as well with that missile attack, neither missile actually hitting the Diego Garcia military base, but an attack that happened in the last few days but we did not find out about it for 30 hours afterwards. That came out from the US media rather than an announcement from Keir Starmer. He's being accused by the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch and others of basically a cover-up of what's happened. Let's face it, Diego Garcia has been in the news for what most people would say all the wrong reasons in recent months. Is there been a cover-up?
I don't think there's been a cover-up. I mean, firstly, I've got to do my routine Tory bashing, as you imagine. Kemi Badenoch to talk about cover-ups from the Tory party. The party of Partygate, when all of these things that they've done in recent years,
Kemi Badenoch wasn't involved in that.
Well, she's been part of that party. She's the leader of that party now, and it comes with that. People still remember. But I do think with Keir Starmer, what I'm seeing at the moment from him and from his Downing Street team is a lack of reaction to things. I don't know if this is with the change of staff that we've seen. Obviously, Morgan McSweeney is no longer there. He's gone.
Well, he's probably still looking for his stolen mobile phone, which has all those messages with Madison on. I mean, what bad luck! What bad luck!
Unbelievable.
Morgan
To the bottom of the Thames, I think.
All those messages, Madison, stolen.
But yeah, so I do think they've been slow in their reactions to things, and obviously hesitant because, as you say, Diego Garcia is not the thing that they want to repeat. I think they don't want to hear that name ever again, to be honest.
They just want to quietly pay $35 billion to Mauritius to give it away.
Listen, that's obviously the thing that has bogged them down.
Do you think that Keir Starmer has? Because lots of people saying, well, actually, he was better. He's better judgment than than Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage at the beginning of the war, saying he didn't want American missiles to be fired from Diego Garcia, British-American joint base. It would only act offensively. Is this a position of sort of, principle and practicality, or is it just the usual fence-sitting indecisiveness from a Prime Minister who really hasn't got a clue what he's doing?
I think it's a classic Keir Starmer thing of this obsession with international law. Now, I say that as somebody who appreciates international law, but he does everything in a very lawyerly way. It's about the letter of the law for him and what matters to that. And when he can't find it, when he can't suss it out, he finds himself in very difficult situations, because that's always been his guiding light. But politics isn't about that. Politics is about also your opinions. It's also about your values and where you stand. And he's often searching for them as well, and he struggles to find them. And I do think if he had that as a guiding principle at his core, we would see a lot more confidence, would see someone who spoke authentically. And that's what people don't like to see from Keir Starmer, that kind of dithering and his kind of fence-sitting, his weather vane politics, right? But I do think that glimmer of hope for him, and he needs to pay attention to it, was when he took a stand, when he stood up to Donald Trump, and he looked like he had a spine for once. People seemed to like it.
Yeah, there was, this was the idea. It was a Love Actually moment.
It wasn't. I mean, it was. He found himself in that situation by accident. He didn't set out to take on the president of the United States.
I mean, do you think he has any sort of principles or strategic thinking on any of this, or, as many suspect, is actually a lot of his policy making based on trying not to upset Trump too much, but also trying not to upset voters ahead of the local elections, the Scottish and Welsh elections as well coming up, to voters who are turning to the Green Party en masse, in particular the 4 million Muslim population in this country, who many of whom we saw the Gorton and Denton by-election just went en masse to the Green Party over Gaza. We've also seen the move, there was 5 basic MPs for Gaza elected at the last general election on that issue, and that actually a population that many of whom have arrived in this country only in the last 10, 20 years is helping to decide Britain's foreign policy right now, because our Prime Minister's running scared of losing their votes.
Well, it's representation, isn't it? And everyone deserves representation if they have a right to vote. And that's just democracy. It's just a point of democracy. But I wish Keir Starmer would chase votes more. I don't think he chases them at all. I think his problem is that he does everything as he thinks he should in some government department or as a bureaucrat, and he follows those rules. But Morgan McSweeney was the one who kept his focus on the electorate. He was obsessed with the electorate. Morgan McSweeney was an organiser. That was his background.
He was also Chief of Staff deciding a lot of policy. And virtually every single thing that they did, they had to U-turn on and all.
Exactly, which is why McSweeney was a problem, because that job of being running for government and being in government, completely different set of skills.
You say, look, this is just democracy, and the Prime Minister's representing a community. Again, I'd love to know whether the white middle class boomer white and women communities. Have we got am I just a woman? Is that who I imagine? But the reality is, we are talking about a relatively recently arrived population. Many of the people who have those votes will be people who...
That's necessarily true. I think,
the Muslim population in this country has... Of course, they've been here for a bit longer, but the largest number of Muslim population people in this country who are able to vote are people who have actually come in the very last recent years, in the last couple of decades. Is it appropriate that Britain's foreign policy should be changed based on the views of recent arrivals whose views may be sort of tainted by sectarian views coming from their home country? Is that appropriate?
Are you asking me if I think it's appropriate that people who have the right to vote?
I'm very much of the view that I don't think we should be handing out British citizenship and the right to vote to people who are relatively recent arrivals.
Well, I mean, I don't think that is the majority of these people. I disagree with that. These communities, a lot of them in Northern England, especially in North West England,
will be born here in Britain,
are British born,
yes,
and therefore have the same rights as the rest of us.
Absolutely, and I completely accept that. However, we are talking about a population that has arrived. Their parents, all these people are second generation, all these people are also first generation.
But it is interesting, isn't it? I do think we talk about, the Muslim communities and the way that they're steering foreign policy and all these things, right? Which makes them sound not progressive. There is no way in God's green earth that anyone who is not progressive in their values would vote for the Green Party. Why would anybody who wants to oppress women vote for Hannah Spencer?
You think the large Muslim population, Gordon and Denton, were voting for the Green Party because of their policy on trans?
No, I didn't say socially liberal things. But what I'm talking about is
polling is very clear.
Would a community of people who want to oppress women vote for Hannah Spencer? No, they wouldn't. It's ridiculous. It's a complete ridiculous.
You could say that, but they did, and women are oppressed.
And she's now their representative in Parliament.
World.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't think that argument quite flies. I think people were voting on the issue of Gaza rather than.
I think there are multiple things. I mean, Gaza is obviously something that solidifies people. I see it up in Edinburgh, I see it in Glasgow. I see young people who have never been politically active politicised by that and what they've seen on our TV screens.
Yeah, unfortunately, on the BBC.
There's more to it than that. I do think.
Right. Well, we'll discuss this again. I'm very, very sure. I promised Benedict Spence to get a chance to come in after the top of the hour. Big thanks. Lovely to have James Mathewson here in the studio. Love to hear your reaction to that. 0344 499 1000. It's the number to call. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 11. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense and free speech, and I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, great to have your company. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm with you live until 1 o'clock. Don't forget, if you miss anything, if you just missed anything in the first hour of the show, frankly, letter from your mum, frankly, why are you late? Go to my YouTube page, The Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe, you never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, more on that anti-Semitic attack on Jewish ambulance services outside a London synagogue overnight. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, vowing to deport thousands of migrants before they get a chance to appeal. Yeah, good luck with that, love. Never going to happen. And the petrol stations hitting out at Labour's cost of living czar for claiming drivers are being ripped off. No, they're not, they say. We'll talk about all of that and, of course, more on what's going on in the Middle East. Small matter, you know, of things going completely escalated in the Middle East. Joining me for the conversation throughout the show, I'd like to say, is Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Morning.
Good morning.
Who's very frustrated having to sit there while we interview James Mathewson, not getting a chance to have his tuppence worth. But I do want to hear his thoughts and your thoughts, in particular on Keir Starmer calling the Arson attack on 4 Jewish ambulances in London deeply shocking. He's called for people to stand together. We've seen Wes Streeting there. We've seen all the political heavyweights piling in. But what is your reaction to that? Because I didn't think it was shocking. That's my worry. I think it was entirely predictable in a timeline of events. I'm just relieved that no one died, as they did in the Heaton Park Manchester synagogue attack last year. But what's your reaction? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1. Standard network rate message. Benedict Spence, just first for your response to that attack. The reactions we've had, Wes Street and the Health Secretary's been there. He says he's going to make sure that the government is going to fund 4 new ambulances. I think everyone was basically getting ready to give donations for them to buy more. And they said it was a despicable act of evil and intended to strike fear into the heart of the Jewish community. But he said, but the Jewish community won't be cowed by this. In terms of the government response, I mean, everyone's saying all the right things, but frankly, it doesn't really wash anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't. You know, providing new ambulances, that's great, but I do think it's kind of the bare minimum. The reality is that these sorts of things are going to keep on happening as a result of a lack of action when it comes to police intervention on this sort of thing, because we all know, actually, that there's not going to be anything like the mobilisation of resources that there should be towards stopping anti-Semitism. And ultimately, also, this is because there has just been a complete sea change in attitudes towards anti-Semitism, excuse me, in this country, largely driven as a result of migration and the war in Gaza. We've imported millions of people into this country who do not have anything like the attitude towards Jewish people that we would expect of fully integrated British citizens. And there is no sign that that is actually going to abate.
And the polling is very, very clear on
Very clear. And this actually is where I want to then turn into the conversation that you were having with James Mathewson, which is on the subject of people's democratic rights. He was sitting here saying that the people are here, they have the right to vote, and that has to be respected regardlars. But that
can I just clarify the context of that? People who just tuned in, which is that one of the criticisms of Keir Starmer and his foreign policy is that partly it's just indecisive and hopeless, doesn't really know what he's doing. It's all about international law, but also that he's basically terrified of doing what he knows he should do because he's scared of losing the Muslim vote. We've got 4 million plus people, obviously not all of those are over age able to vote, but 4 million plus people who are in this country, much bigger contingent than what the 250,000 or so is it Jewish people in this country. So and he's worried about losing that vote to the Greens, as he saw in the Gordon and Denton by-election, in the local elections that are coming up in May the 7th and in future elections. And basically we're talking about community voting on issues like Gaza, rather than issues that, you know, that perhaps most British people would be worried about.
We shouldn't even say voting on Gaza. It's voting on Jews. That's what it is. They're voting. It's voting on Jews. But here's the key thing: these attitudes are going to be protected because people will say, "Well, that's democracy," but we don't live in a democracy. And I'm sorry.
What do you mean we don't live in a democracy?
We don't. And here's the big one, because this is what gives these people the right to vote on all of these things. Consistently, the British population has voted for parties that have promised less immigration over and over over and over, and they are not listened to. They're not given it. So please spare me they have the right to have these things and for things to be enacted because it's their democratic right. Politicians in this country do not believe in democracy or the rights of people to actually have enacted the things that they want. If they did, those people wouldn't be in this country in the first place. That's the great irony of all of this. So every time people talk about, oh, you couldn't possibly want to take away the democratic rights of people, this government and previous governments have done everything they can to erode
That's a very, very good point. And given the fact that actually the large number of British-born people are born for their second generation to people who came in under mass immigration policies, we saw it from Europe, we saw it from the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere, which again not approved of by the British people. In fact, they actively said no, we don't want that, and not because they're bigots, but just simply because thank you, we're full. I think is rather the view. But it's interesting. Wes Streeting talking about this despicable act of evil. Wes Streeting going along and wringing his hands. And he's a Labour MP I've had a lot of time for over the years. Very, very friendly. You know, someone like, if I see him at an event, he and I would end up saying chatting, plenty of time chatting, and I think he's a nice bloke. But again, he lives in a constituency where he's got a majority of just a few hundred, and he almost lost it to sort of the pro-Gaza independence because of the issues of what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Last September, he attended the raising of the Palestinian flag at the Palestinian embassy when Britain, the British government, outrageously, completely wrongly, gave a full recognition of the Palestinian state as a reward, a clear reward. We know this because Hamas literally said that's what it was, a reward for October the 7th. So don't you bloody well go to Golders Green and wring your hands and say, oh, isn't it terrible, what a despicable act of evil by anti-Semites against the Jewish community in London, when you joined in the clapping and the cheering, you got your face on the camera as they raised the flag of the Palestinian embassy after your government rewarded terrorists for raping, burning, beheading, shooting, killing and taking hostage 1,200 people from Israel. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways.
No, you can't. And you reap what you sow, because this is the reality. All of these Labour MPs who have got those shrinking majorities are now going to, bend towards that sort of demographic and those sort of voters and say, well, we'll try what we can to possibly win you back over to our side. They're not going to vote for you anyway. They're not going to vote for Labour MPs anyway, because now they have their own candidates. Now they've seen they can win seats. The Green Party has stolen a march on them. And you raised the example of Hannah Spencer, winning in Gorton and Denton. And James said, well, people who want to oppress women are not possibly going to vote for that sort of person. They're not stupid, these people. They're not complete idiots. They understand how politics and power works. You go to those parts of the world, people don't necessarily vote on the issue of conscience. They vote for who is going to be the strong man in that constituency. They do it, they get into the party politics that way, and then they change things from the inside. This is a tried and tested format. We know how politics works in Pakistan, in Bangladesh.
And you know that world very well. You've done a lot of work.
It's really straightforward, and I'm sorry, it's such a classic British, sort of a perspective, which is we are multicultural, we're open and we're tolerant, and we don't care about learning the first thing about the people we invite into this country, because to learn anything, that would be either gauche or maybe even possibly a little bit racist to admit that there are differences. It's incredibly blind. This
is the really weird thing, is you constant talk about different communities, so acknowledging the differences.
Exactly.
And then at the same time say, no, people are different. When the polling shows that the polling shows again that different communities have wildly different views on things. And on average, again, I do not believe that every Muslim in this country, I absolutely will stand up on this, every Muslim in this country is an Islamist. Absolutely not. However, a very large percentage, a very large minority, way too many people are sympathetic to the aims of the Islamists. And you're talking at best case scenario 10% of 4 million, worst case scenario 20 or 30%. Those numbers are huge, bearing in mind that 95% of those on the terror watch list are people who are Muslim, because they hold to an Islamist view. And by the way, that Islamist teaching is in the Quran. It's not just some random, theology from elsewhere. It is part of that. And people really, really need to get with the programme on this. And we need to have an open conversation, which of course is even harder when people are calling for the likes of Nick Timothy, the Shadow Justice Secretary and Tory MP, to basically lose his job because he said, sorry, people are too polite to talk about this. I don't want to have mass Muslim prayer in Trafalgar Square. Now, I'm of the view as an atheist, I don't really want to have mass anyone prayer in Trafalgar Square. But I need to read out something, a fascinating breaking news statement from Donald Trump here, because we did have that deadline, 48-hour deadline given on Saturday by Donald Trump to Iran, basically, well, to the regime in Tehran. Basically, you've got to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by UK time midnight tonight, or they're going to, in his words, obliterate their energy plants, he says, and of course that would have a massive impact. Iran threatened back that they would also attack energy plants in Israel and across the Middle East. Donald Trump has just posted on his Truth Social site the following: I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed and constructive conversations, Donald Trump has continued, which, by the way, some terrible spelling in this, very difficult to read, which will continue throughout the week. I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Now, you always know it's a policy issue when he says, thank you for your attention to this matter. Very interesting development, because, of course, there had been negotiations about nuclear facilities before these attacks started by Israel and US. Well, we're in the 4th week now of these attacks. Lots of people fearing that we are looking at, this war escalating, I mean, quite literally blowing up into something much bigger, certainly involving, across the Middle East, as we've already seen those attacks by Iran on many of the other Arab states in the Middle East. But also that attempted attack on the Diego Garcia base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, showing that Iran does have ballistic missiles that could get as far as Western Europe, including London. The International Energy Agency warning that we're facing an oil crisis that's worse than the combination of what happened in the 1970s, those of us who remember that, and what happened in 2022 with the Ukraine war. Basically, that combined, that's encouraging. I mean, surely, if that is the case... That is very encouraging if they're actually having a conversation.
It is, but of course this is a large part of the issue, which is that, if Iran does start striking other countries, actually oil infrastructure and the strait is closed, well, that also means Iranian oil can't get out, and then the regime itself
but
has only got a very limited amount.
they're allowing Iranian and Chinese oil.
Exactly, Chinese oil, and that's the problem.
Chinese-bought oil.
But that's the problem, is that actually if that were to halt, if the Iranians started striking oil fields in Saudi Arabia, that sort of thing, then actually the United States would start sinking those ships. And actually, the thing is, everybody's sort of looking at it going, well, they'd never sink, say, sort of Chinese-flagged vessels. Yeah, they would. The amazing thing about all of this is China's attitude towards the US military. So many other people are looking at this from the outside. The Russians, for instance, are going, the United States, it ain't all it's cracked up to be. And the Iranians are going, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. The Chinese are the ultra-cautious ones here. There's a reason they haven't struck Taiwan yet. And why they want to build up to a position where they don't actually have to invade, where they simply smother the island into submission, because they are terrified about the prospect of a civilizational conflict with the United States. If it's a regional war with Iran, they're thinking, OK, it's a bit like Vietnam, a country can hold out. If it's an existential threat, China doesn't believe it could necessarily survive.
No,
it thinks the United States could die as well, but it doesn't want that.
Ultimately, the American military dwarfs even the Chinese military.
The Chinese military would be able to commit appalling devastation on the United States mainland, but China does not want civilizational collapse. It's not like Iran. It doesn't have a doomsday cult, and it's not actually interested in pushing global communism.
We're talking about Xi Jinping.
No, we're not even talking about that. He's not the dictator like Putin is. It's the kind.
He is now.
No, he's not. The Politburo still has a lot more control than say the equivalent in Russia. The point is, China is on a sort of it's lived through the century of humiliation. It wants wealth and prosperity, and it wants safety. It doesn't want to be attacked. And there's the interesting ideological issue of Taiwan. That's also a territorial one, but it actually wants to avoid the conflict. And that's why ultimately, even now, they're not pouring all the weapons into Iran that they could be doing. They didn't even pour all the stuff that they could have done into Russia in that war. They do like to sort of sit back, take their time, and think, what is the long-term strategy here?
But again, this is a lot of people were saying at the beginning of these strikes on Iran about how much this actually was about sort of depleting China's ability to fight by maintaining control of the Strait of Hormuz. And then there's all this concern that when the Iranians were able to close it, like, well, hold on a minute, didn't you lot all think of that? This is the worry. Again, I do not have Trump derangement syndrome. I'm very practical. Again, he was the best candidate versus Kamala Harris. I mean, thank God what he's done in Israel, getting those hostages back. I mean, sorry, but he'd have been handed 5 Nobel Peace Prizes if he'd been any other president but Donald Trump. But I am concerned that he and Pete Hegseth, his Secretary for War, that they're not detailed people, and they're not necessarily taking the advice of their military, and strategic advisors. That's the big concern. But this seems to be the off-ramp. Now, Donald Trump does have a history of right, I'm going to up the ante, want to play, because, and his thing has always been, I don't care about the Strait of Hormuz. I don't get, America doesn't get its oil. It does actually impact oil prices and fuel prices and inflation in America as well. But there is an element where and a lot of his advisors are sort of his willingness to say, I will do anything I want. I'm crazy. I'm unpredictable. That is a strength sometimes, especially when you're dealing with properly crazy people like the Iranian mullahs.
Well, we saw this when he whacked Qasem Soleimani, and everybody was going, "Why on earth would you do that?" And it turned out to be the best thing that he possibly could have done. You took out the head of the snake in that situation.
In Iran.
The question, though, here is, if you're taking out ayatollahs left, right, and centre, and you're striking lots of members of the IRGC hierarchy, who ends up taking over? Because you might have the fanatics, and there are religious fanatics, of course, at the top, but there are also pragmatists. What I think has been the goal for a long time is get to a position where you can actually not affect regime change by the people rising up. That I don't think was ever plausible. But where there's actually a power struggle,
very unpredictable about who ends up.
Actually where there was a power struggle within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps itself over who takes charge, and maybe then you get the possibility of somebody who is more pragmatic, looks at the world and says, "Listen,
they might be an Islamist, but
I'm not going to get my Islamic revolution. It's not going to be great, but I do get the chance to lead the country, and that's better than being king of the ashes."
This is the fascinating thing. People on the left, and you certainly see it across the BBC and everywhere else, and then this constant criticism of Donald Trump. They haven't got any war aims. They've all been very, very confused. Sky News is out saying, they're always saying, "Oh, we don't know what the war aims are." He literally said what the war aims were when he first launched his strikes, when he was in Mar-a-Lago in that statement in the darkened room, and he was very, very clear, and it wasn't regime change. So when an American president says we're going to go for regime change, like somewhere like Iraq, no, that's outrageous. Who do you think you are? Or in Venezuela. And when he goes, no, I'm not interested in regime change. People of Iran, if you want to rise up, now is your opportunity. But I'm concerned about your ability to get nuclear weapons, posing a threat to America and to the wider world and to my allies in the Middle East, including Israel, and as it turns out, pretty much all the other Arab states as well, most of whom are now run by people who care far more about money than they get, and wealth, and their gold Rolls Royces than they do about praying 5 times a day. That's the reality. But the thing is, they pick and choose. I think the war aims have been very, very clear all throughout. And it's nothing to do with regime change. And that's not my problem. We tried that in Iraq and Afghanistan. Turns out it doesn't work. Now, Iran is actually a country that would possibly be possible in. It's a secular state, largely. I mean, this is the weird population, 70% secular. You could see a scenario, and very sophisticated, very well, highly educated. You could see a scenario where it would work. But, that's neither Israel's nor America's problem. Nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles that can reach Western Europe absolutely is. Yeah,
and from what we can see, actually, the plan to degrade Iran's capacity to launch these things is working. It is successful. The thing is, though, and again, we saw this with Ukraine, we've seen this with lots of other things as well, Gaza especially. A lot of people, armchair pundits, commentators, journalists, lawyers in the West, like to sit back and they see any sign of destruction coming the other way as a reason why it must stop. Everything is disastrous. It's like they've forgotten what wars are. It's like
completely. Well, the same with Gaza.
It's like, the Gaza
apparently
situation.
Some civilians died in Gaza. Really? Did that happen in wars?
Gaza is the best example. They seem to think that everything's like Call of Duty, that every soldier basically has a sniper rifle and will never hit a civilian, and every airstrike is clean. That's not how the world works. But of course, then when you have other examples like Darfur, well, they don't really care about that because it's not something that matters to. Exactly, it's not.
No, but also, by the way, it is so unbelievably well documented now. Anyone who says they're a genocide scholar and says they're a genocide, trust me, they're an idiot. Any genocide scholars, come on air. I'm happy to call you that on air. This is absolute nonsense. This is a simple matter of fact. And no, I don't get my 7,000 shekels for saying this. It's a simple fact that the civilian to combatant ratio of deaths is virtually 1.1 to 1. Now it's a remarkable tally. It's 9 to 1 in most. When we fight a war, when America fights a war, it's usually 9 civilians die for every combatant. It is as simple as that. Israel massively put its hand. basically tied two hands behind its back to not kill civilians. They gave warnings. You see these footage, the destruction. Gaza completely flattened. Well, actually, it's Rafah you're mostly looking at pictures of. The reason why Rafah was flattened was because Hamas basically put an IED into pretty much every room of every building in Rafah. They knew exactly what they were doing, and therefore there was no choice but to take those buildings out. But by the way, if every single building was flattened with civilians in it, you would have lost half the population of Gaza, and we didn't see that. If Israel wanted to carry out a genocide, have they not shown that they are unbelievably good on the battlefield? Unbelievably strategic. What they did with the Hezbollah pages, Iranian, the way they've got the whole of Mossad's basic work. Most of the Iranian regime was a Mossad agent. The idea that if Israel wanted to carry out a genocide, they wouldn't have done it on day one. It's a nonsense.
Yeah, the disgraceful thing actually about all of the people who cry about this the most is, I wouldn't even say Darfur and South Sudan. No. Actually, it's Syria, which is literally right there. And the appalling atrocities that have been done against predominantly civilians, where militias were going after civilians specifically. And forget Iraq and Afghanistan, which were also the ones where you had sort of 8-to-1 and 9-to-1 sort of civilian ratios. Syria has been an appalling humanitarian catastrophe.
Targeting any
and
militants.
These same people who go out to protest against Gaza, that's fine, but you then have to answer, so what about that one that's not even halfway across the world? It's
and
literally
they certainly
right
don't
there.
seem to be remotely concerned about what's going on in Iran in terms of the attack ongoing. But by the way, teenagers are still being executed. They're being hanged in public for having been involved in these peaceful protests against this regime. Not a word from this lot. Do you think this attack on those 4 ambulances, the Jewish ambulance service in Golders Green, do you think that is... people say it's an anti-Semitic attack. Why would it have been the causes? Again,
is it an anti-ambulance attack? Do people hate the NHS? Well, they might do, but obviously that's what this is.
So in terms of the motivation, we've got 3 suspects on CCTV that be doing track down, and hopefully will be caught and charged and prosecuted. But do you think that's as a result of what's happening in the Middle East right now?
I think that what happened in the Middle East sparked the bravery of a lot of anti-Semites to feel that they could go out and say this sort of thing en masse, because they realised very quickly, actually, if we do it in large enough numbers, the police won't actually.
And we say we're anti-Israel.
Yeah,
then it's so.
That's what gave them. It's what emboldened them to do it. But these attitudes did not, spring up one day. No. It's because we have invited millions of people into this country who have incredibly backwards views on Jewish people, not Israel, on Jewish people. The key giveaway here is the number of people you see on these marches from Pakistan and Bangladesh, 2 countries that have nothing to do with that part of the world. And these are people who never go to that part of the world, and they have very strong attitudes about Jewish people. And you think, right, so why would Pakistani and Bangladeshi people... It's because of what they're being taught, indoctrinated from early on in life. You don't even get the same amount of visceral from Arab nations in the regions. You don't get it from the Emiratis or the Saudis or the Kuwaitis.
Well, by the way, none of these marches and things, none of this stuff's allowed in any of those countries.
No, and this, just to finally take it back to that last point, what we were talking about, why it is that there are that many people here, it's because in those parts of the world, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they arrest these people and often they leave. Do you remember Alaa Abdel Fattah, the Egyptian man, member of the Muslim Brotherhood? He's here now.
Prisoned in Egypt and
those people are imprisoned in those countries,
our
and
Prime Minister.
They come here because they know they will have a degree of safety that they do not have in that part
because
of the world.
We tolerate intolerance. Just a reminder that Donald Trump, Truth Social post, basically saying there's been conversations between the US and Iran in the last 2 days after that ultimatum given to Iran, and he says he's instructed his Department of War to postpone any military strike against power plants, energy infrastructure for 5 days while they carry on with those conversations. So hopefully a winding down of the war. He says the US is close to the objective of winding down the war. Fingers crossed on that, assuming we've achieved those war aims. 11:26 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on that, your thoughts and your reactions to that horrific attack on the ambulances in Golders Green. Thank God no one got injured in that arson attack. That's the only thing we can say is good news this morning on that front. But give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is a number to get in touch. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:28 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000. Some of your messages and texts and tweets as well. First up, let's go to Adit, who is in Golders Green. Hello, Adit, what do you want to say?
Thanks for having me, Julia. I think the residents are nervous, they're shaken, and the goal of the terrorists have been met. You know, they wanted to intimidate us. We are scared. My wife this morning is asking, you know, should we send our child to school or not? I mean, that's the kind of scenario that we're all facing. And it's a byproduct of, you know, what the polity of the day, both mainstream parties in the UK have shown. You know, they've given disproportionate amount of patronage to Muslim politics in the UK, and this is the byproduct of that. You know, when you stand there and you patronize, you know, Free Palestine rallies and you patronize Muslim politics in the UK, this was always going to be happening. So the writing was there for us in the war. We just missed it. And now, as a consequence, you know, you will have the Keir Starmers and the various politicians coming saying that, you know, we are very sorry about this, and yet they will go on and, you know, provide 40 million pounds of, you know, security to mosques, whereas other communities will continue to suffer the wrath of Muslim politics.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, we know that the British taxpayer also, and the government also funds the community trust, you know, that does the work for the Jewish community. I mean, I don't want a tax on any, you know, on any religion, whether it's Muslim or Jewish, religious or charity, any or buildings of any. I don't want to tax on anyone, but it does seem to me that we've imported a lot of this problem. But we often have people will say, well, you know, if Israel wasn't doing what Israel was doing in the Middle East, we often seem to see that justification, don't we?
Julia, my point is, as an Indian man, as a man from India who's migrated into Britain, has paid his taxes, I do not want to see foreign politics interfering on British streets. And that is what we've seen time and time again, whether it be the politics from the subcontinent, whether it be politics from the Middle East. We've got to stop advocating for politics of abroad being patronized on British streets. And that's what British society needs to stand up for. I think we've just lost our spine. We've forgotten how to demonstrate our spine and stand up to these kind of barbarity being shown on the streets of London.
Given where we are, starting from this point, not where we would like to be starting from, what should politicians do now? What should the police do now?
Well, for starters, I think we need to start proscribing international organizations like the IRGC as terror outfits. I mean, it's clear that, you know, Ashab al-Yamin, who allegedly have taken responsibility for this attack, and they've done this previously in Belgium and Netherlands. You know, this is an Iran-linked group where we're told, but we don't. Again, this is reports on Telegram and Julia, the same with Muslim Brotherhood. Why is the Muslim Brotherhood proscribed in the Middle East as a terror outfit, but not in Britain?
I genuinely, I don't think that describing either of those groups will actually make a blind bit of difference to what's happening on our streets right now.
And then we've got to stop calling out. We've got to understand that Britain needs British politics, not the politics of Palestine or Kashmir or anybody anywhere else. Okay, really appreciate that call, Eddie. Thank you very much. Calling in from Golders Green, of course, which is where that arson attack on the 4 ambulances of the Jewish charity were attacked. Let's go to Thomas now. He's in Colwyn Bay. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, how you doing?
Very well. What do you want to say?
I think it's really interesting to see the difference in the reaction and the coverage to the perception of ambulances being attacked by Israel in Gaza and in Iran to this attack in Golders Green. Not 4 days ago did the IFRC put something out about ambulances not being a target. Nothing from the British Red Cross, nothing from the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Amnesty International.
Wait a second, you're saying the international charities, they make it really clear that ambulance shouldn't be a target in Gaza or Iran or elsewhere. Healthcare should absolutely not be a target. But you're saying they haven't. I mean, I'm guessing they didn't expect this to happen in their defence.
Amnesty International has put a post out saying that it's appalling, this attack. Where's everybody else's response?
Okay.
Why is it important in Gaza and Iran, but not here.
Yeah, basically the two-tier response and the holding of different standards. Thomas, thank you for that. Let's go to some of your texts and tweets. Also, Marcus says, if this happened in Israel, it would be considered a terrorist attack. Stop playing around with silly words and call it what it is, terrorism. Stephen says, simply remember Kristallnacht. I mean, yeah, absolutely, this is what it's about. Kat says, it's truly despicable, the Arson attack. This follows years of media distortion and lies led by the BBC and over 2 years of marches calling for the destruction of Israel. All of those lies have demonised Israel and normalised hostility towards Jews. Kat, you've explained that rather better than pretty much any politician. And that is what happens. I mean, these things have nothing to do with each other, sort of, but they do, you know. John says, has the Prime Minister blamed the far right for this yet? Yeah. God, but they've got their fingers crossed, haven't they? They're really hoping it will be. Eileen says, I wish Starmer would learn that appeasement never works. Flo says, blah, blah, blah. He's allowed the virus of anti-Semitism to spread. It's after Keir Starmer called the attack deeply shocking. And Deborah says, he must realise that allowing the hate marches has fuelled anti-Semitism in the UK. I mean, yeah, I mean, and I just don't think that that's even up for debate anymore. I really, really don't. We just allowed it to just fester and carry on. And it is something we've largely imported. When you look at the rise in attacks, anti-Semitic attacks in this country, trying to get the stats for who are the perpetrators behind them, yeah, quite hard to do. But I'm pretty sure I won't be incorrect in saying who those perpetrators largely are. 11:35 is the time. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to be talking about the Home Secretary and her bid to deport thousands of migrants before they can appeal. Well, very good luck with that, Shabana Mahmood, but I'm not entirely sure the rest of the Labour Party is on board. That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:36 is the time. Let's speak to my next guest now. He's Laurie Wastel. He's Associate Editor at the Daily Sceptic and joins us to talk about, well, the latest cunning plan to deal with illegal immigration to this country by the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Another Monday, another plan, eh, Laurie?
Well, quite, Julia. It is, yes, a cunning plan, an interesting plan, I think it's fair to say. So what's going on here is the Home Secretary has realised, as many people have, that the asylum system is really a merry-go-round in many ways, with all these appeals that migrants can lodge endlessly to keep them in the country. And so what she's saying is that she will be deporting migrants before them having had their appeals heard to countries that are deemed to be safe. This is a fairly large list of countries that it's not all of the ones we might want to be on there, and therefore those appeals will be heard in foreign countries. So it's not nothing. There's, well,
so they still get the chance to appeal, but they're going to have to appeal from across from the overseas. But hold on a minute. Weren't the Tories talking about this at some point when they were in power? And didn't Labour go, this is an outrage?
Yes, indeed, and it's interesting that Shabana Mahmood is seeming to be more forthright than a large amount of her party, certainly. But I think that is the key point. The ECHR will still be applying to this? Okay, so it would be very, very possible for any of these migrants to actually win these appeals. Eventually, they'll be supported by charities when they're making them in foreign countries, for instance, and activist lawyers and so on. So this raises the almost extraordinary prospect of migrants in a country like Nigeria, for instance, to which they have been deported, then launching a successful appeal for asylum and then being flown back.
Brilliant.
So it again seems like a bit of a half measure.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the idea would be, well, it dissuades people, but I'm not sure it would in that scenario. But also, crucially, it would mean that we weren't paying for them while they were here. But the reality is, with all this madness in terms of the completely incorrect interpretations about people's rights under the European Convention of Human Rights, and would it not be the case that actually we wouldn't be able to deport these people? There would still be charities and human rights lawyers who would challenge that.
Well, I think the idea certainly is to get around that. It is likely that that some of the sort of pre-appeal deportations would also have challenges to them. But I think that the key problem is that they could, as I say, be flown back. I think we should give her some credit. I mean, the raw problem of asylum seekers in this country is simply the fact that they are here. This is the cost of asylum hotels. This is the potential putting the British public in danger. And this is also the incentive for them to come. And let's remember, there is another loophole that this does close off, which is the ability for migrants to abscond.
Yeah.
So that would be, that's another reason that we don't really want to have them in the country when these claims are being processed. Yeah. But that said, the question is numbers. Will she be able to get this through the courts and potentially her own party?
But surely, given that we don't have the caps to hold of the people, we don't have some sort of prison camp even for the people who arrive, on any given sunny weekend, for goodness sake, even in the the winter months these days. These people are going to be free to move around. As soon as you know you're going to be deported to Nigeria or Somalia or wherever, you're just going to disappear off into the black market, as they already are. They're only staying where we know where they are because they're being housed and fed for free. Why would you bother hanging around otherwise? So none of this is going to work. We've also got the added joy, have we not, that we're expecting now a surge. I mean, I don't know how we can get an even bigger surge. I mean, how many can come across in a day? But another surge in migrant crossings in coming weeks, because this deal that we've got that funds the French beach patrols is running out within days. We spent £475 million over 3 years, and it comes to the end at the end of this week. At the end of next week, it comes to the end of that payment. It's not been very successful. We're told, the French are stopping half the boats maybe on a good day when they happen to not be at lunch, smoking their gitanes, looking at people on the beach. But I mean, is it going to get worse, even worse than it's been already, given that we've seen a surge under Keir Starmer already?
I think absolutely. I mean, one key factor in that under Starmer has actually been the scrapping of the Rwanda plan. We know that it's really the prospect of getting into the country and not getting deported that allows people in. It's those pull factors, and that Rwanda plan, whether or not the flights did end up taking off, it did actually seem to be quite a strong measure to prospective migrants, and therefore does seem to have been a bit of a deterrent. So that was a very unwise choice. But of course, the key point here is that we're here in March. We've had a very rainy period in the first 3 months of the year, but now we're heading into spring, into summer, and so that is really one of the key determinants of the migrant crossings, and they're going to be looking likely to have a massive amount of crossings over that period. And for the issue of migration in as a political issue as well, it's really going to turn up the temperature, I would say.
Yeah, and we've seen those battles between the Labour Party, so it's big wigs already, haven't we? Because we've had, over the last few days, we've had Angela Rayner. She gave that speech that she gave on, I think on Wednesday, where she was basically talking about how she was very much opposed to Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary's sort of attempts to clamp down on the rights of people once they're here legally, to then be able to claim basically permanent residency and having to wait, instead of just 5 years to make that application, having to wait 10 years, something which most people consider to be a minor and very welcome reform. We've had Andy Burnham back, Angela Rayner. This has definitely become an issue there. And again, this does also tie in, does it not? Because a huge number of the people who are coming from abroad, the largest number are coming from Pakistan, a lot from Nigeria as well. We are talking about largely Muslim countries, and it is absolutely fascinating how much all these stories tie in. We talk about the anti-Semitic attack on the ambulances in in Golders Green. We've got the issues with Iran and Iranian extremism on our streets and the threat there, and of course this issue over Britain's foreign policy and local policies being basically decided by a fear of losing, quote, the Muslim vote, unquote. What do you make of all of that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Pakistan there, Julia, because that has often been a blind spot in these restrictions that Shabana Mahmood is bringing in. So if we think back to her recent restrictions on countries getting student visas, because so many of their students were then going on to claim asylum, she targeted that at countries including Afghanistan, Myanmar, and a couple of African countries as well. Where there was a high rate of this abuse, but the country with the highest rate or certainly the highest absolute number claiming of students going on to claim asylum is Pakistan, and that was not flagged for that list. And once again, in this case of countries to which migrants could be deported before having heard their appeal, Pakistan is not on that list, it seems. And again, that's a country where we have seen a lot of asylum seekers, and there's actually no war going on in Pakistan, so it's
not quite sure why we're
so many.
Yeah, absolutely bizarre. What did you make also? A Labour council has, and this is quite an extraordinary story. A Labour council has basically criticised people for saying, basically you cannot say that migrants have no respect for women. This idea that that many people coming from, let's face it, from Muslim countries are coming from countries where they do not share many of the modern British Western liberal views on the equality of the sexes and the like. And this is Liverpool City Council. They've issued an online mythbuster addressing asylum and immigration, saying blaming foreign cultures for violence against women and girls reinforces harmful stereotypes. There is no causal link between asylum seeker populations and the increased level of violence against women and girls. And it's wrong to claim that migrants come from cultures that don't respect women. What do you say about that?
Well, it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we're hearing from these Labour councils that we're not supposed to draw any link between the countries that these places, these gentlemen are from, and the crimes that they have gone on to commit. At the same time, we often hear in the courts, don't we, Julia, that actually, they'll go slightly more leniently on this particular sex offender because they were from a country where they didn't actually know you weren't supposed to.
And we've literally had judges saying this. You didn't really, the defence given in court and accepted by the judge is that, you didn't realise you're not supposed to, sexually grab 14-year-olds in your culture.
Yeah. So which one is it? And yes, it's very clear that these are countries with different cultural values, and this is why so many of these attacks are happening. I think there's the issue with illegal migration and asylum seeker crimes, which have been happening in particular in the last 2 or 3 years. But of course, there is also the grooming gangs, and this is a much more widespread systematic abuse. But as central to that is the view of these white girls as really other and as as it's been described, easy meat, essentially. And
I believe that phrase was used in court at some point, wasn't it, by a defendant, I believe?
Well, it's the title of a book, certainly, and I think probably that's certainly the perspective that many of them have towards them, describing them in racist terms.
I don't know, given we've got this new definition of anti-Muslim hostility, I don't know if we're even allowed to have this conversation legally anymore, Laurie.
Indeed. Well, yes, and that is another unfortunate consequence of multiculturalism, really, that we have this amount of demographic change, amount of cultural change, and yet we're often told we're not really allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Laurie Wastall, Associate Editor of the Daily Sceptic, thank you so much. Covered a lot of ground there. Benedict Spence, come back in whichever aspect of that conversation you want to.
I mean, in particular, the thing that sort of really gets to me is this idea about respect for women and stuff like that, because ultimately it's not just one thing. We see the lack of respect for so many aspects of our society that comes from certain migrant communities. And the issue that many people have is not that people are coming in, it's that refusal to assimilate in the first place. And I'm afraid that does require several things. We've been talking a lot about Jewish people throughout this show, but it's women as well. But it's even basic little things, like, do you hear the story about the plans to restrict dog walking and stuff in certain parts of London because it offends certain members of the community?
No.
It's insane.
No, but even, I mean, look, I refuse to not eat bacon because I'm someone in the restaurant or something. Or
in schools, they don't serve pork products in some cases, in case it offends people. You're not allowed water bottles
but even like, I'll eat bacon in front of a vegan as well. I don't don't care. I think it's just that's not tolerance. That's tolerance of intolerance.
Yeah, it's insane. And other countries
do
not
this.
go. Yeah, no, to no extreme extent. You know, and if you go to parts of the Middle East and stuff like that, go to Istanbul during Ramadan. Do they stop serving food at lunchtime? No, they don't. They absolutely go. Exactly. No, of course, we're open for business because you're not Muslim, so we expect that. Yeah. Why is it just this country that takes us that?
Exactly. When in Rome, but when in Britain, do what you want. 11:48 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. First up, though, the Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Luke Williams. He's been giving a statement on site in Golders Green where that arson attack took place. He says that it has been declared an anti-Semitic hate crime. It's not been declared a terrorist incident, he says, at this stage. But the investigation is being led by counter-terrorism officers. Up next, going to be talking about, well, how the events in the Iran war are affecting our economic future. By the way, all of the outlook is bad. That's up next with Paul Johnson, formerly of the Institute for Fiscal Affairs. That's up next. This is Talk.
The Crown is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royal tea from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in crisis. Subscribe to the Royal Tea from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
The UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:51 is the time. Just a few minutes left before the top of the hour to talk about the small matter of our economic future. And in the wake of the announcement from Donald Trump on his Truth Social site that he has entered talks with Iran over basically a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East, saying that he's instructed the Department of War to postpone those planned military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. That was planned if they did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz by midnight tonight UK time. We have seen oil prices, which had been feared to be going up to sort of like $200 a barrel, so pretty much more than doubling in price over the period of the war, now plummeting down again. So hopefully good news. Well, let's find out how much with Paul Johnson. He's the former director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Morning to you, Paul.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Well, look, I mean, that Truth Social post from Donald Trump, if it is the case and there are talks and we could see an end to the hostilities, at the very least, not a tax on, oil infrastructure, that's good news for everyone, pretty much, isn't it?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, we've been saying throughout this conflict that the economic consequences will depend essentially entirely on how long this goes on. So if this is really an indication that hostilities are going to come to an end, well, the consequences won't be nil, and we will still suffer some continuing increase in energy costs, but they won't be anywhere near as bad as they would have been had this if this were to continue on for months and months. So who knows quite what Donald Trump's going to do next?
That's the thing. The unpredictability.
This is a glimmer.
The unpredictability is part of the problem, is it not? I mean, that's the concern. I mean, we've got lots of fears of where the economy is going. We've got the Prime Minister's chairing this COBRA meeting this afternoon. The Bank of England governor is going to be one of those people attending it, along with the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary, and really helpfully Ed Miliband, taking us all back to the dark ages, one wind turbine at a time secretary. Not entirely sure his input is going to be that helpful, but we do know that there are problems coming. We're seeing prices creeping up at the forecourts. We're told, because we need fossil fuels for things like fertiliser. We're looking at costs of our food going up, our energy bills going up by perhaps another £300 this year after the next price cap ends. And this comes, of course, just ahead of April, where of course we've got all those other little taxes, council tax going up, the tax thresholds frozen. Things are going to start getting very tight for an awful lot of British people, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, this will. I mean, there is a little bit of positive news in April in that some of the green levies are being taken off energy bills. So we'll have a short period of a little bit of help there, but then come the next change in July, then things will go up several £100s, which will more than outweigh those impacts. You're also right, of course, about the freezing of the tax allowances. I think that's the 5th year in a row now when tax allowances have been frozen. That is a mighty big increase in taxes. And actually, if you look over this Parliament, indeed you look over this decade, people's earnings aren't going up very fast, but their incomes are going up much less fast because taxes as a whole are going up. And that, of course, reflects all of these years of huge deficits and big increases in spending, because there's also big spending increases over this period. But as you go back to that COBRA meeting, yes, I mean, they're going to be talking about the fact that, I mean, a month ago, people thought the Bank of England was going to have a couple more interest rate cuts this year. They're now talking about 3 interest rate increases. That's clearly going to be a big issue for anyone with a mortgage. It's also a big issue for the economy, because you might need to do that to keep inflation down, but with an economy that's stalling, you increase some interest rates, you put more of a stalling effect on the economy. That's more pressure on the government actually to spend more, but the government's really not got much room.
And they can't borrow anymore because of the cost. I mean, are we at the risk of stagflation? It's this idea that we could actually have stagnation, we could go into recession, but also still have a high inflation?
Well, I mean, let's hope not. Let's hope that Donald Trump is going to do what he says he's going to do. But the answer to your question is yes, there is a risk. There's exactly a risk of that, because that's exactly what would happen if we get the higher inflation as a result of what's going on in the Middle East. The economy slows down. The Bank of England increases interest rates, slows it down further, and the government's constrained about what else it can do. There is a real, again, let's hope this stops soon, but there is a real possibility. If energy prices get higher, and they're getting significantly higher, we get worse off. I mean, there's just no getting around that, and that will manifest itself in some combination of higher prices and lower real earnings in that sense, or lower employment and lower living standards in that sense. I mean, we can't. In the end, you just can't escape that. I mean, this is just making us worse off.
I mean, and that's the word. We've had a warning from the International Energy Agency, basically saying that oil crisis, certainly before this statement from Donald Trump this morning on Truth Social, is worse than what we saw in the 1970s. I think you and I are both old enough to remember that. But also the 2022 Ukraine war, and obviously we saw that impact, of course, not just on oil prices, but also, supply of fertiliser, food and everything. We saw that we got to 11.1% inflation in this country. But basically they're saying it could be this combined. If we look at things backing off and we're not looking at things escalating as we were fearing, certainly even just a couple of hours ago, that will be good news. But even if, let's say, the Iran war was over today, if that happened, Strait of Hormuz was reopened, energy production continued, would that be the end of the problems, or is a lot of that already built in terms of those higher petrol and diesel prices, higher heating costs, higher food costs?
Some of it's built in. I mean, this is not going to have no effect, not least because a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed. But you'll get some supply constraints. So this won't be anything like as big an effect as if it carried on. But there's no getting around the fact that I think oil and gas prices, particularly oil prices, will stay higher than they otherwise would have done, and that will have its knock-on effects on everything else.
Okay. Oh, well, on that happy note, Paul Johnson. Happy Monday, everybody. Sorry, I just missed that. What did you say?
You never want to talk to me if you want to get cheerful.
Paul Johnson, Mr. Happy, former director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Thank you. I know we want the honest analysis, do we not? And we've also had, have we not, Benedict Spence? We had petrol station bosses. They've hit out at Lord Walker, Richard Walker of the Iceland, not the country, the shops. They've hit out. He's the actual cost of living czar for Labour. He claimed drivers were being ripped off at the pumps. They're saying no, that's actually not true. Prices are going up for us. I mean, that is the reality. Oh, you can't shield people from this.
No,
stuff.
you can't. And it was very classic Labour politicking, saying, "Oh, there's price gouging going on." It's like, no, the market reacts because prices go up. It's nothing to do with greedy bosses or anything like that. But of course, that's Labour's default response, isn't it? It's the evil rich.
But even the big oil companies, it's just like, well, hold on a minute, the price has gone up, and most of the price we pay, by the way, is tax. Or it's either VAT, it's fuel duty, it's other surcharges. So if the government wants those prices to come down,
maybe they should stop price gouging. All of us. Maybe they should stop doing that.
Price gouge, that's for sure. Anyway, plenty more coming up. Delighted to say up next we're going to be talking to Richard Dannatt, Lord Dannatt now. He's the former head of the British Army, about that attack on Diego Garcia, where we are with what Donald Trump has said in talks with Iran, and what happens next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense, and I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, thank you so much for your company. If you missed anything of the show already, well, frankly, you're crazy. We're on the way till 1 o'clock, but don't forget to go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe, and you never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, we are going to be discussing Donald Trump, his extraordinary post on Truth Social saying that Iran and and America are in talks right now regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. He has instructed the Department of War, he says, to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. So that deadline would have been midnight, pretty much UK time tonight, for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, or attacks from the US on energy infrastructure in Iran, which would have been met with retaliation from Iran to not just Israel but to also other Arab states in the Middle East in terms of their energy plants as well. That deadline is no longer in place. So that will be a sigh of relief for everybody. We've seen the oil price already plummeting down in the hopes that we can see the end of this war. We're also going to be talking about Keir Starmer being accused of basically lying to the public, keeping them in the dark over Iran's failed missile strike on the Diego Garcia military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We're also going to be discussing more, of course, the anti-Semitic attack on the Jewish ambulance services, 4 burnt-out ambulances outside a London synagogue. It has been declared as an anti-Semitic hate crime. Counter-terrorism unit is leading the investigation, but it has not, according to the Metropolitan Police, been announced as designated as a terrorist attack, certainly as yet. We're also going to be talking more about scrapping most short-term jail terms. That's coming into effect in England and Wales as of today. So if you're going to be sentenced to under a year behind bars, you just get a community sentence. It's basically a free-for-all. Oh, yeah, and we're going to be talking about McMillan Cancer charity, who just said they're going to prioritise welfare support for vulnerable communities like ethnic minorities and LGBTQ plus people for their cancer care. Well, I'm going to prioritise not giving my money to a charity that discriminates against me and my loved ones. We'll talk about all of that. Joining me for the conversation, Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, still here. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Before we speak to Lord Dannatt, just got to get your quick thoughts, if I can, on this Donald Trump announcement of basically Department of War is going to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure. Are you hopeful that we will see an end to this war?
I don't think it'll be an end to the war. I think it will simply be a pause whilst the United States maybe recalibrates. I'm very hesitant, but it's good news up to a point. The markets seem to be responding vaguely positively. Oil prices are coming down, bonds are coming down. So we wait and see. Let's hope.
Well, let's see what my next guest thinks. He is the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, who joins us live here on A Talk. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Well, I mean, how optimistic are you after that announcement from Donald Trump?
Well, every day, every hour brings fresh surprises. And I think at breakfast time we wouldn't have considered where we are now to be likely. But I think this is classic Donald Trump. I mean, he put this 48-hour deadline down, which is due to expire about midnight our time tonight. And one began to wonder, gosh, would he really carry that threat through? Yeah. Would he really carry out the threat to destroy Iran's capability? That would be a massive escalation. So what he's done, I think, is very cleverly, at least temporarily, called success, calling for a 5-day, effectively a ceasefire. And he says that they've been very productive conversations with Iran. But, you know, you do wonder who in Iran he's been talking to. He's boasted about having killed most of the leadership in the past. Yeah. And one wonders whether, in fact, actually, his talks are fabricated by himself to get himself off the hook.
Oh, really?
Of an ultimatum that he knew that he couldn't really follow through.
I mean, but that's the thing. We've seen an ultimatum before, haven't we? You know, Obama in his red line in the sand in Syria in terms of chemical weapons being used, and that red line was walked over and nothing happened. And it's very important when a world leader, particularly, you know, the American president, issues a red line or an ultimatum that they are willing to carry through in it. But I mean, this is the question. I mean, you say, like, is it a ceasefire? But it seems to only specifically be talking about any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure. So it looks like the war is going to carry on. The strikes on military targets will carry on. Just not specifically, though, I've seen some reports suggesting that if there were attacks on energy infrastructure by US, that would be a war crime. Is that the case, given that, of course, okay, this stuff is used, obviously, for civilians, and he said previously he wouldn't attack this infrastructure because, you know, the Iranian people would be needing those after the mullahs were deposed. It was the hope, but But if the Iranians are using that energy infrastructure to wage war, is it a legitimate target?
Well, you ask a very good question, and you've partially answered it yourself there, Julia. I think international lawyers would have a field day arguing whether attacking desalination plants, for example, constitute a war crime or not. But equally, you could argue that water is required to manufacture weapons and ballistic missiles and so on and so forth. So I think the international law fraternity would have a field day discussing this particular issue. But I think coming back to the main point, we don't know. We only have his word, which we have to take at face value, that they've had productive talks between Iran and America. For all I know, Turkey or Oman may well have been the interlocutors that have facilitated some form of conversation. And whether any or all of that is true, I think another major factor is what is Israel's attitude to what we could perhaps best call an operational pause. It looks as if Israel is determined to see the diminution of Iran's influence and strength. It seems determined to carry on its attacks on Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether Donald Trump is able to lean on Prime Minister Netanyahu to actually rein the Israelis back. And that's not a given.
And there's been quite a lot about, actually, they've got very different war aims, haven't they? Interestingly, just while we were talking, the Fars agency, news agency in Iran, has said there's been no contact with the US. Again, directly addressing the point you made, what proof do we have there has been this conversation?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think Donald Trump is remarkable in a rather negative way, that he can say one thing and then he can say another thing. And frankly, no one really knows where the truth lies. I think the positive is that it looks now as if he's not going to smash up and obliterate Iran's civil infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And that has to be a good thing for Iran, obviously. But I think it's also a good thing for world trade and for the world economy, because I think we were all staring down the barrel at breakfast time this morning. A really serious and ongoing economic crisis. Now, whether that will rematerialise, heaven only knows. But at least we've got a crumb of comfort, I think, now.
Well, indeed, we're often told, aren't we, that politicians will talk about their political aims and diplomatic aims, and war is the extension of diplomacy by other means, and they would seek help from advice from people like you, when you were former head of the British Army, in terms of the tactics of how military can be used to achieve any of those aims. Are you convinced that you know what the strategic aims of this war are?
Well, I think we thought we knew at the start. I think there were three. One was to reduce, if not remove, Iran's capacity to generate a nuclear weapon. Second, similarly, their ballistic missile capability, much reduced that so it couldn't strike Israel and US bases in the Gulf region. And then thirdly, this clearly stated but then walked back from objective to get regime change. Now, I think most people realize that you're not going to get regime change by purely bombing from the sky. A regime change will only come in Iran if the people of Iran want it. And I think there's a contrary effect here, that because the Americans and the Israelis have been so tough on Iran, that even people who were questioning their support of the regime are probably toughening their support now, because they frankly don't like being kicked around by the Americans and the Iranians. So I think two of the three objectives can be largely achieved. The third one won't. Whatever else Donald Trump thinks he's doing, you've got to read inside his own mind if you can.
Yeah, although, of course, I think he was rather clear, wasn't he, that, this was an opportunity for the Iranian people to rise up in the face of the IRGC, if they could, but it wasn't going to be something. Regime change wasn't something that the Americans were going to go into Iran to achieve. You mentioned ballistic missiles and that ballistic missile threat not just to Israel but to US bases in Arab states around the Middle East. But of course we've also seen that a missile attack thankfully failed on Diego Garcia, US and British base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, suggesting, against what appears to have been all the military intelligence so far, that Iran does have weapons which can reach pretty much twice as far range as we thought, which meant they could hit London, Berlin, Paris and elsewhere. How concerned are you about what knowledge we have about what potential threat Iran poses to the West generally, not just even to the Middle East, and what needs to be done about it?
Well, I'm quite sure that our defence intelligence community will be thoroughly examining the possibility that Iran could have a ballistic missile that could reach as far as London. I think from what I've understood, it's theoretically possible that they might be able to extend the range of their existing longer range missiles, but it would probably mean that the payload that it could carry would be very small and not entirely guarantee that it could reach as far as London. But
is it worth the risk? I mean, there's lots of fear that we are defenceless against Iranian missiles, that we don't actually have the proper defence capability if Iran did.
That's what I was going on to say.
Okay.
You go right back to the 97-98 Strategic Defence Review at the start of Tony Blair's government. There was a programme called Ballistic Missile Defence, which it was decided not to continue with, and the cost savings from cancelling that programme, and I was director of the Defence Programme staff at the time, the cost savings from cancelling that programme meant that most of the rest of that defence review was then affordable. Right. And since then, there has been no widespread ballistic missile defence programme carried forward, nothing like the Iron Dome that the Israelis have.
Yeah.
Now, we've got a certain amount of ballistic missile defence, but it's mostly point defence. The Type 45 destroyers, for example, HMS Dragon, manfully making its way towards Cyprus
still
at the present point, has got that kind of capability. But it's point defence, not blanket defence. And if we thought there was a credible, serious threat to this country from extended ballistic missiles, well, there'll be a lot of head scratching going on in Whitehall and the Ministry of Defence at the present moment to work out what to do about it. It would be a real challenge.
Well, indeed, again, and if we weren't aware of that ballistic missile capability, then what else are we not aware of them, and indeed any other regime? And that's the concern, isn't it? How concerned are you about that missile attack, an attempt on Diego Garcia? One missile shot down, one missile failed. But the fact that we didn't know about it for apparently 30 hours, and actually the information came out through the US media rather than an announcement from the Ministry of Defence here, would we normally expect to be told that sort of thing publicly, immediately, within days? Has there been a cover-up, and does that concern you?
Well, I can't think why there would be any good reason not to make that information available. It's a British base, there are British service people there, and if they have come under some form of attack. And of course, we've only got probably unverified reports that one failed in flight and one failed to hit its target.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't know. We know that a US warship took it down. Now, we don't know where in the Indian Ocean it did take it down. Was it very close to Diego Garcia, or was it some distance away?
Yeah.
I think that's quite relevant in terms of determining the overall range of these missiles. I'm quite surprised if that attack did materialize, that it wasn't made public by both the British government and the US government at the same time and rather earlier. It does smack of some form of cover-up, and that is not helpful. I think British people have a right to be kept informed, and the government needs to be transparent.
We're in the fourth week of this conflict right now, and again, the impact is being felt not just in Iran or in Israel or US bases in the Middle East. It's across Arab states and now much wider, and the economic impact, of course, affecting everyone around the world. And we'll certainly hope that that can be stemmed by what was announced this morning. If you were currently the head of the British Army, what advice would you be giving Keir Starmer about, from word go, about what Britain should be doing, what he should be doing?
Well, I think right from the word go, I would have been prepared to advise the Prime Minister, or advise the Chief of the Defence Staff to advise the Prime Minister that if the Americans requested the use of their bases, which we provide for them, that they should be allowed to do so. It seems rather odd that the base at Fairford and the two in East Anglia and the one at Diego Garcia, which we provide to the Americans, that at the moment that they want to use them, we say that they can't.
Yeah.
Okay, he then subsequently changed his mind. Now, the other argument has been made, well, they didn't consult us, so they didn't bother to try and build a coalition of the willing, so we were taken by surprise and the default was to say no. I think we should have been more agile. I think we should have thought about the long-term consequences of saying no, because we need allies, the Americans need allies, and we've always been a very trusted ally of the Americans. And let's face it, Keir Starmer has made much over the last 18 months of his ability to get on with Donald Trump. So to destroy that by a quick decision, which was inevitably going to annoy Donald Trump, I think was quite short-sighted and lost the view of the bigger picture.
I realise as a military man you don't normally do politics, but can I ask you, are you concerned, as many have expressed, that British military and tactical and diplomatic decisions are now often being made based on concerns about particular communities and how they vote in this country? Whether we've seen the last general election, we saw those 5 MPs for Gaza, we saw the Gorton and Denton by-election and votes going with the Muslim community there, managed to go to the Green Party on the issue of Gaza and international politics. Are you concerned at all that Britain's foreign policy, and therefore by definition its sort of defence policy, is being changed by just the influence of particular communities in Britain?
Well, I am concerned. If this is true, it is deeply upsetting or deeply concerning. I think what our leaders should do is work out what is in the national interest and take policy decisions based on the national interest and not their own narrow electoral calculations about saying this or saying that, doing this or doing that, will actually what effect that will have on their chances of winning an election or staying in government. So I think what statesmen need to do is work out what is in the national interest and take decisions and base policy on the national interest and try and take a medium to long-term view rather than just short-term politically electoral decision making.
Are you saying that Keir Starmer is not a statesman?
Well, I think it's not really for me to say. Donald Trump has said he's not a Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was certainly a statesman, but then equally Donald Trump was not a President Roosevelt. He was a statesman.
This is true.
I think labelling people is probably a little bit cheap, and I think I won't indulge that one.
Are you concerned, though, because this is a concern for all of our audience watching and listening right now and people around the country, are you concerned that this impact of international, various different communities, but in particular communities coming from a view, a very anti-Israel view, that is actually damaging our national interest and that it is putting us more at risk?
Well, I think everything that happens in the world these days tends to be interlinked. There is a school of thought which is quite possibly correct, that the 4 Jewish ambulances that were set fire overnight was a result of some Iranian intervention, or at least an Iranian sympathizer that took action, or group that took action like that. So I think we have to accept that many events across the world are interlinked, are interrelated, and the linkages are probably there.
OK, really good to talk to you. Always great to get your thoughts and your expertise. Lord Dannatt, former head of the British Army there, Richard Dannatt. Thank you for that. Benedict Spence, interesting there. That chuckle and that pause was a bit of a giveaway about the statement question to him about Keir Starmer. But interesting talking about, the concern about, British politicians to act in our national interest.
Yeah.
I remember doing this at A-level, history A-level, and it was just about, British interest, who's our ally in Europe? No, we've always gone for the balance of power in Europe. We kind of support whoever is sort of, under attack. We've had interests around the world. We were a great empire once, and we have, whether people like it or not, we can't be isolationists. We have fingers in pies everywhere around the world.
We do, and I think that acting in British interests is something that has been lost sight of by a collective of people, and it's not fair to just put the blame on Keir Starmer because he is simply a product of this school of thought, which
He's
is
the Prime Minister.
In the post-imperial age, that Britain has to still continue to act as though it is representing and acting for people around the world. It can't do that, though. It can't, if it doesn't, look after itself first. That's the only reason Britain became an empire, because it was strong and powerful at home. Until you get those basics, fundamentals right, you can't be everything.
Had reliable and cheap and affordable energy sources.
Energy, industry, a strong military, rule of law.
Those all come back to...
They all come downstream of coal, basically. But that's the thing. thing. Until you have those basic building blocks there and a rigid system, a robust system, actually you can't be everything to everybody. The United States can do it up to a point because it has those things. China increasingly is flexing its muscles because it has those things. We don't. And until we get to that point, there's no point.
I just think we're all very relieved that Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, is going to be at this meeting, this COBRA meeting today about our future. I mean, genuinely, he's the problem, not the solution. That's the biggest issue.
It's incredibly depressing that a man who was soundly rejected by the British, and go back to what I was saying about us not really living in a democracy, the British public had the option of Ed Miliband.
And they
said no, and yet he's been foisted back on us, and he is in charge of the very building block that is most important.
But this is the key thing. You think, he's only Energy Secretary. No. He's Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary. He's Housing Secretary. He's everything. He's everything, guys, because energy policy decides all of those things. It is as simple as that. And at the end of the day, we are paying an absolute fortune to get our oil and the gas from the North Sea, but we're paying Norway for it, and the Norwegian government is taking all those tax receipts and getting all that money and getting all those jobs, and we're not, because we've got this brilliant policy. We're going to import all the fossil fuels that we still need and will need for many decades, rather than getting out of the ground near us. Genuinely, mind-bogglingly insane. Some of us have been saying it before it was fashionable, but there we are. 12:23 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to take your calls, and particularly on that horrific attack, the arson attack. It's an anti-Semitic hate crime, is what the police have called it, but basically firebombing those 4 community charitably provided ambulances in Golders Green. This is Talk.
Is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royalty from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in Crisis. Subscribe to the royalty from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 12:26 is the time. Let's get to your calls and your texts and your messages all about that anti-Semitic arson attack. Well, it's been called blatantly a hate crime by the police. It's being investigated by the counter-terrorism police, Metropolitan Police, but has not been declared as a terrorist incident, certainly as yet. This is the attack on on 4 ambulances blown up in a firebomb attack at a Jewish emergency service. Basically, it's a charity that funded by local people, local charitable donations, and it's the Hatzalah Northwest fleet of ambulances, and it's basically a volunteer Jewish ambulance service. And for all the hate mongers at the back, it is funded by and run by Jews, but it is not just for Jews. It is open to anyone in the local community. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, he has attended today. The London Ambulance Service is going to offer extra help in that particular area in the coming weeks, but also they're going to fund the replacement of those 4 ambulances. Of course, with taxpayers' money as opposed to charitable money, but that's the service that is available. What is sad is that anyone needs to use a charitable provided ambulance service anywhere in the country rather than just having a decent NHS service in the first place. Small point, I think, worth making. But this has been regarded as a anti-Semitic attack. We've had all the great and the good. We've had the, Wes Streeting, of course, he's called it a despicable act of evil. Says, I thought that's what it was when he stood in front of the Palestinian embassy when they raised that flag after we recognised Palestine as a state, as a reward for killing and maiming and taking hostage people on October the 7th. But, different ideas there, Wes. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, said this is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. My thoughts with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to the horrific news. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with any information must come forward to the police. And he said it's really important that we all stand together. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has said this is a cowardly attack on the Jewish community. Londoners will never be cowed by this kind of hatred and intimidation. Many, though, will say that those men have actually been partly responsible for the growth of anti-Semitism that led to attacks like this. Let's talk to Herbie, who's on the line in Harrow. Hello, Herbie. What do you want to say?
Good afternoon. Well, what a shame this was last night. What a disgrace to our nation to allow this to happen. For years, we've all lived together. We've all, worked together, played together and everything else. And all of a sudden, we've got all this going on. We've allowed these maniacs to come in unchecked, unsupervised and everything else, and now we're paying the price for it, and it's only going to get worse. It ain't going to get better.
We have imported this problem. I know there's a problem on the sort of left wing, of the hard left wing, the Labour Party and the like. But now your party and Jeremy Corbyn are there. But mostly we have imported this problem from the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah, and we're paying the price for it, Julia, and it's only going to get worse. How can these people be so damn disgraceful to do this to a charitable organisation, ambulances that we need. We're in desperate need for this. We haven't got the ambulances to take us to hospital and everything else. This is a charitable organisation serving the community, everybody, including Arabs, including Muslims and everything else. Yet they have to go and destroy their help's sake. Unbelievable.
But it tells you everything. It tells you everything about the level of hatred. I must read you to David Collier on social media, and he's one of the guys. He's one who exposed, the fact that it was a son of a Hamas official that was in that BBC documentary. He's a fantastic investigative journalist, and he's written this morning. Do you want to know what the scariest part of all this is? Even if they are caught, there are 3 suspects caught on CCTV. He says, Herbie says, 1, the CPS will deliberate for months about whether to charge them. 2, the courts won't find space to hear the case for 2 years. 3, by then the anti-Israel movement will have given them a label like the Golders Green 3. Number 4, some left-wing politicians will stand behind them. 5, and after all that, the jury will find them not guilty because they've been fed BBC News pro-Hamas propaganda for the last 2 years. I fear, Herbie, that he's right.
It is right. Julie, we are pandering to these people without any... They know they can get away with it. They don't care. We're not doing anything. We're not fighting the fight. We're actually letting them do what they like. They can say what they like, and it proves it, Julie. It just goes on and on. We have got a cowardly Prime Minister, and we've got a police force that shouldn't even exist because they're not a police force. They're dumbwaiters, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you said it, Herbie. Thank you for that. Marion is on the line in Norfolk. Hello, Marion. What do you want to say?
Oh, hello. After I saw it on the news this morning, I felt really, really sick to my stomach and angry, and I wanted to cry and shout that Britain has come to this.
Yeah.
And then I wish I could speak more eloquently.
No, you're being just fine.
Then I put my Sherlock Holmes hat on, which I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist and a secret crime investigator. And I looked at the aerial photos of the location. Across the road from there is a business building with a camera on the corner and spaces behind that building where you could potentially park a car unseen. Now, I did notice that those 3 people arrived from the same direction they left from. I can't imagine those 3 running around at 1:30 in the morning with black hoodies on without being noticed.
Are you kidding me? I see people running around at 3 in the afternoon on an August summer's day wearing black hoodies and masks, and no one seems to question it.
I know, but there must be cameras all over the place. So I'm thinking, I don't want to hear any excuses that they couldn't find, they couldn't find
if they came in a vehicle, being able to track that down. Well, yeah, we know there's a lot of CCTV around there. Again, provided like the synagogue, for instance, this ambulance station is basically by the synagogue, and of course they have to have that security because we know about those attacks there. Well, we shall certainly hope, and I would like to think there's some pressure on them. But again, when those guys, I know I yap on about this, but this tells you everything. A few years ago, people coming down from the north, they're driving in their open-top car and they're shouting about raping Jewish wives and daughters in the middle of the street, waving their flags, got the number plate, got the identity of these men, and then no one was ever actually charged with a crime. And I'm sorry, if that isn't a crime, why would you think that anyone is going to be put off from committing a crime like this? I mean, thankfully, no people were killed. That's all I can say. Marion, thank you for that. Benedict Spence, we've had all this reaction and everyone's wringing their hands, and we were talking earlier at the beginning of the show before we had this Trump announcement, which rather took over, about everyone's shocked and devastated. I mean, no one who's paying attention should be shocked. Yeah. And words are fine, and everyone's saying the right things, but if you're not going to do anything about it, if you're not actually going to stop it, we're not going to start arresting people doing this. And this isn't about freedom of speech, but when you allow hate marches on the streets every single fortnight, when you allow people to do things like shouting they're going to rape people, blatant shouts of when you see allow people to say globalised intifada, which basically means kill all Jews everywhere around the world. That's what it means. When you allow that, what do you expect?
Yeah, of course. This is the state deciding that it's going to interfere in people's lives in some aspects and just not bother to interfere in others. And ultimately, I think they've got their priorities entirely wrong. They'll go after people for saying all sorts of things on Twitter, that are bad jokes or perceived in the wrong light. But when it comes to actual physical overspill into activity, into on the streets, they're nowhere to be seen. I just want to sort of pick you up. It's not really a criticism. One thing that you were saying, which is, thank God nobody's died. But the point is, these are attacks on ambulances. It's entirely possible that somebody in London will, fail to get to hospital or fail to be attended due to an emergency that could have actually happened as a result of this. Yeah. This is not simply an attack on property. It is an attack on people who are vulnerable, because only vulnerable people need ambulances in those moments when they need intervention. That's what makes this particularly callous. OK, they're not going to be convicted if they're ever found and charged of murder, but they could well be responsible for the deaths of people.
Very, very good point. Thank you for that. 12:34 is the time. Up next, going to talk about the utter latest woke madness. I never want to let this stuff go because it really is as mad as it could possibly be. McMillan Cancer charity to prioritise giving support to those people who they consider to be vulnerable, ethnic minorities, and guess what? LGBTQ plus people. You couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. We're going to talk about all of this with Amy Gallagher. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:36 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spence also in the studio. I know you'll be wanting to put your tuppence worth in on this stuff. None of which is as important as an anti-Semitic attack. Let's just have Kristallnacht in our capital city reenacted, shall we? Or indeed the prospect that we may, according to Donald Trump, although it does appear the Iranians aren't saying the same thing, may see the end of this possibility of this conflict ending in the Middle East. But yeah, you know what? This other stuff does matter. And I do want to talk about the general madness in our country. And if you ask me, actually, the fact that we've got the madness of the horror of this attack on this Jewish charity set of ambulances is actually bizarrely linked to the woke madness we've been under, where basically common sense and decency have just been thrown by the wayside. Factual evidence, things like that, thrown by the wayside in the wake of woke ideology, which says, for instance, that Israel is always bad and Jews are at the top of the pile, but also that somehow Muslims were at the bottom of the pile, and of course any ethnic minority and anyone who says they are LGBTQAI plus, or whatever the latest acronym is. And I want to talk about all of this right now with Amy Gallagher. She's a former NHS nurse. She worked at the Tavistock course, famously, where those where children were getting those puberty blockers, but she's also now a commentator on the New Culture Forum. Very good afternoon to you, Amy.
Good afternoon, Julia.
So much I want to talk to you about. Let's start, though, with McMillan Cancer. McMillan Cancer Support is a wonderful charity, at least I thought it was, offering support to people while they go through cancer treatment, advice, information. But, I mean, a lot of people, devastated and, worrying about benefits and getting work. And it's really important work. They have announced extraordinarily, because apparently they're a bit short of cash, they're going to prioritise access to their welfare advice for gay, transgender and ethnic minority cancer patients, or also those with existing health problems, as opposed to anyone else. And basically staff will be asked to prioritise those with caring responsibilities as well. But basically everyone else, sorry, we may or may not get you in line. Now, I pointed out on social media yesterday that I'm obviously praying for all of the trans women who are being treated currently for cervical cancer right now, and hoping they are getting the help they need from Macmillan. But this is an extraordinary thing for a charity to announce, and let's face it, it's already backfiring for them.
Yeah, it's such a shame to see Macmillan go down this route. I mean, one thing about cancer is that it does not discriminate. 1 in 2 people will experience cancer. Most people know a family or a friend who has had cancer, and it should be something that unites all of us, and where identity politics is left at the door, because it's something that we share, all of us. I don't really understand how they've decided that these groups, ethnic minorities and LGBT groups, are more vulnerable in relation to cancer. There's no data to suggest that cancer outcomes are worse for gay people than straight people. In fact, national data shows that white people are more likely to die from cancer than other racial groups in the UK. So to me, it's like they've just decided that these are vulnerable groups, which is actually quite patronising to those groups, and decided that they need more welfare. Well, surely welfare should be based on their financial situation or their health situation, not whether they're gay or what their race.
Exactly. Well, I've got a lot of male gay friends who haven't got kids, and they're financially absolutely great, Nick, because they haven't been paying for kids all these years. And the pink pound has long been known as, people who've got a lot of spare cash. It's a bit bizarre that we're told that. It is just an extraordinary thing that they should announce this. Not only that they should do it, but they should announce it. And of course, then they want to have a round of applause. I've seen, hundreds of people replying to this news story, basically saying, I used to give money to this charity, I won't anymore. But I'm not going to give any money to any charity that is racist. Which is if you are going to prioritise ethnic minorities over white people. If you were prioritising white people over ethnic minorities, that would also be racist. But I'm also not going to give money to a charity that is promoting, trans over women with cancer.
Yeah, it's crazy. So many people feel so much positive feelings towards Macmillan because they are so helpful and they are a wonderful organisation. And to politicise themselves in this way and to divide people, it's such a bad move for them. And I do wonder if it's because of activist groups. Or
of course it is. It always is.
It must be, because they're scrambling for money, and perhaps they've allowed those groups in because of funding. That's the only reason I can think of. But it's such a shame, as I said, because it is something that you should unite us all. Yeah. And it's so damaging for their brand to have gone.
Well, no, again, they ain't getting a single penny from me, and I hope no one else will give them money at the moment. There must be other charities that do wonderful work, cancer support work, and we should be giving our money to them. In fact, double our commitment to them, because this charity needs to know the deal. There's another story. Now, I'm a bit confused about this one, but whether we should be angry about this one. But basically, there's been a big fuss over a trans woman. Again, I say trans. They're men. A man who's been appointed to represent an endometriosis charity, and who said that the condition affects people of all genders. And this is a man who's a human rights activist. He describes himself in this role. It's called Steph Richards. He's been handed the role of Parliamentary Engagement Officer for Endometriosis South Coast. He's also the Chief Executive of a trans campaign group, Translucent. But basically, he's going to be doing this work for the charity. And a award-winning female novelist, Amanda Craig, she has said, "Look, this is absolutely ridiculous." She said this is like having a white person speaking on behalf of black people, and it's totally inappropriate. It's discordant and wrong. The Endometriosis South Coast have said that it's scientifically inaccurate to claim that only women experience endometriosis. They say it also affects trans, non-binary and intersex people. But endometriosis it relates to the uterus lining. And the only people who have uteruses are quiz time. Amy Gallagher, as a former nurse, who has a uterus and who doesn't.
Yeah, of course, it's only women that are affected by this condition. I mean, as a nurse, I've treated quite a few women with endometriosis, and they will say, you know, I've had symptoms of this condition for a long time and it wasn't diagnosed. I didn't get the final diagnosis of endometriosis until I had further investigations. And they often say that they felt that there was a sexism involved and that their symptoms weren't taken seriously because they're
just a bit whingy moany.
Yeah, there's female symptoms that, you know, related to menstrual cycle and infertility and so forth, and they felt that they were just fobbed off. So there already is an existing sexism around this condition. So to add insult to injury, the idea that the representative for women with this condition would be a man who feels that being a woman is just putting a dress on, therefore undermining the whole biology of women that suffer from this condition, is a further insult. Because it just adds to the sexism on top of that.
If he's a great communicator and he knows his stuff, I wouldn't have an issue. I wouldn't have a problem with a male doctor, you know, providing a cure for this. I mean, I don't see why it needs to necessarily be a woman. I mean, does it need to be someone who's suffered endometriosis who's representing? I would argue it just needs to be someone who can do the job. But it's the fact that he, and again, the whole way through the copy, they refer to this person as she. Steph Richards may have a gender recognition certificate or not, I have no idea, but he is a man. When you're born a man, you'll stay a man forever. But the fact that they're saying nonsense things like that trans, non-binary and intersex people can suffer from this. I mean, a trans person, well, yes, if you identify as trans but you're born as a woman, yes, you may suffer from this. Non-binary, not a thing, because everyone is binary. And intersex people, that's a very, very tiny group of people, and that would be because, you know, you're basically a woman and you've got a uterus. I mean, we are in mad territory. I mean,
I agree with you. I don't have any concerns about a man talking about this issue if he's a clinician and he's got experience. But I think it's the fact that this is a man who says he is a woman based on the fact that he dresses up as a woman. And you then need to ask yourself, what are his motivations for wanting to represent this particular condition?
Yes.
Is it because he wants to undermine women's biology? Is it because he wants to mock them or make them feel that he has power over them? And that is what a lot of women will feel if they feel that the person representing them is basically someone who seems to suggest that women's biology isn't important when their whole condition is about
being a woman.
So it is. I think that's the issue.
It's quite bad. I mean, again, got another completely mad story. We've got the girl guides have now got infighting over their ban on boys who identify as girls. Now, bearing in mind, the Scouts became open to boys and girls many, many years ago. The Girl Guides does exactly what it says in the tin. It's just for girls. And they basically, made it very clear that boys were not allowed to attend the Girl Guides even if they identified as girls. There's now a splinter group called Guiders Against Trans Exclusion, GATE, and they're basically trying to turn local guide leaders into activists and basically forcing them to reverse that trans ban. Introduced one of the few organisations that actually listened to the Supreme Court ruling on this issue. But surely, if they've got an issue, they could just go and join the Scouts, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit like the McMillan Cancer story because I suspect it's just trans activists again.
Yeah.
If you look at the organisers or the leaders of Girl Guides, I suspect that they're not wanting to ignore the Supreme Court ruling. The parents or the children that are attending Girl Guides, for them, it's not an issue. It's something where activists come in and then they put pressure on the people at the top. It's very top down. It's not led by parents or children or people that attend Girl Guides. It's people that have no interest in Girl Guides other than the fact that it's got the word girl in it and they want to try and change what that word means. So it's always from outside pressure. That's what always this is. And I don't understand why the leaders of these organisations can't just say no.
Wouldn't tell them to F off, frankly.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Everyone needs to start doing that. And these people go, oh, and it's just like, no, just tell them, don't care, not interested, go away. As soon as they get the pushback, these people will just go away.
And this is children, remember. Girl Guides is for girls. There's no such thing as a transgender child.
Nope.
The process of gender reassignment surgery is something that adults go through. So a child is not trans.
And most trans identifying people haven't had surgery anyway, or many not even. So either way, my daughter did a lot of this stuff. I didn't want her or her mates being in a tent or a room with a teenage boy, for goodness sake. Funny that, isn't it? Just what I once found a story really briefly got to get to. This is extraordinary. Leeds Council head of HR basically wrote to council staff offering counselling for them and safe spaces for them after the news arrived that Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform, was going to be visiting the city in the coming days. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, firstly, when any of these people claim to be anxious or distressed, I don't think any of it is serious. Or
they probably need 3 weeks off over Easter.
At all. Well, and if they are genuinely anxious and distressed, which I find hard to believe, but if they do need to see a therapist because Nigel Farage is there, actually, all the evidence shows that the best treatment for anxiety is to face your fears. It's called exposure therapy. So I suggest they go and listen to Nigel Farage, because that's the best way to confront.
I'm loving it. It's sort of like holding a spider, isn't it? That'll work. Yes. I'll tell Nigel I use that analogy. Emmy Gallagher, you're just a voice of reason and sanity. Thank you so much. Always good to talk to you. I mean, just got to get your response to that, Benedict.
That would be great, but I tell you what, Nigel would be very tired by the end of that. If everybody had to have a sort of face-to-face 2 seconds with Nigel.
If you've got time, Leeds Council, if you've got time to write that email, to read that email, attend any of those events, you ain't busy enough, you're not doing your job paid for by taxpayers.
Nobody's thinking about Nigel in this situation, though. He might be very anxious about having to meet members of Leeds City Council.
Absolutely. I would be. Certainly the head of HR.
Poor guy, why does he have to go through this?
Exactly. 12:48 is the time. We've got to have a laugh at some point in the show. It's been a grim show otherwise. 12:48 is the time. 49, is the time. Up next, we are going to be talking about, here's some good news. It's a free-for-all for anyone committing crime now. What a surprise. As of today, if you do get sentenced to under a year in prison, you're not going to go to prison, you're going to get a suspended sentence. That's going to work out brilliantly, isn't it? We're going to be talking to former Solicitor General Robert Courts about that. This is Talk.
The Crown is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royalty from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in crisis. Subscribe to the royalty from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:51 is the time. Well, hopefully in the next couple of moments we're going to be talking to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, who's live from Golders Green, that ambulance attack. We'll get to him when we can. First up, delighted to welcome the former Solicitor General, Robert Courts, KC, to the show. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk to you about, a rather worrying development today. We knew this was in the offing, but it's happening as of today. Most offenders in England or Wales who would have faced up to a year in jail as of today are likely to receive no more than a suspended sentence under one of what many are calling the most significant changes to jail terms in decades, part of a whole load of reforms. Basically, stop handing out short prison terms unless there are specific, issues in terms of exceptional circumstances or violence. And basically, this is about cutting down the population of prisons, but also encouraging those who are guilty to plead guilty earlier, because you're not going to wait for your prison term because you ain't going to go to prison. But surely this is going to be a disaster when it comes to deterring crime.
Yes, that's right. It's counter to what the public would expect and would want to see at the moment. One of the gravest concerns that everyone has is that there's the feeling of an epidemic of, in the scheme of things, relatively low-level offending, but that is very serious to the people who are affected by it. And this runs utterly counter to what people want, which is to see that being tackled.
Yeah.
Now, you need to see a package of measures to be put into effect to allay people's concerns and to deal with those offenders who are serving sentences of about a year to 2 years. There is a tough case to be made for rehabilitating people so they don't offend again, but that has to go hand in glove with ensuring that the public are reassured that that offending is being...
But we're often told, aren't we, that, oh, well, you know, jail doesn't work because people come out and reoffend. But this is nonsense. While they're behind bars, they're not committing those crimes. And often people don't go behind bars until they've, certainly with shoplifting, they've committed, 10, 20, 30, 40 offences, at which point they're a repeat offender. Of course they're going to offend again. And I know certainly when it comes to things like shoplifting, a lot of the local shops in my high street, they say, we don't bother calling the police because the police aren't going to turn up. And even if they do, they're not going to arrest the guy. And the police basically are saying, there's no point arresting him because he's not going to get charged. It's a whole load of paperwork, and even if he's not actually going to go to the courts, and even if he does go to court now, he's not going to face a prison sentence. And the thing is, it's this idea, isn't it, that this stuff is, because it's under a year, that it's petty crime. But actually, this is blighting people's lives. It makes people feel unsafe. It's making some businesses unviable, and it can also often involve things like domestic violence. And it can involve assault.
Yes, that's right. And you're right to isolate the phrase petty crime there, because what is called low-level offending in terms of the length of the sentence, i.e. compared to murder or rape or really serious offences, doesn't mean that that is a unimportant crime in and of itself, because it's that relatively low level public order effect that has a really deleterious effect on high streets and on people's confidence, upon their ability to feel, do we live in a society where things are ordered, where if you call the police something happens, where you are being protected by the state? So that ultimately is what everybody does, is they hand over the responsibility for looking after themselves, their homes, their businesses, their families to the state, and they need to have the confidence that the state is able to deal with it.
I'm pretty sure that people don't feel that right now. Robert Courts, KC, former Solicitor General, thank you so much for joining us. Right now, let's turn our attention back to that attack on those 4 ambulances provided by a Jewish charity in North London, in Golders Green. Live for us right now is Shadow Home Secretary, Conservative MP Chris Philp. A very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Look, we've had the Prime Minister, we've had the leaders of all the main parties all talking about how this is a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. We've got the police saying it's being treated as a hate crime, but it is being investigated by counter-terrorism police, but they're not designating it a terror attack at the current time. But it is a terror attack, isn't it?
Well, it certainly looks that way, and the fact counter-terror police are investigating it suggests the police think there's a pretty good chance that is the case as well. Look, I think we need more than words now. We've heard words so many times after hateful anti-Semitic attacks in the past. Yet, of course, this comes on top of the appalling Islamist murder at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester just a couple of months ago. We've seen a surge in anti-Semitism since October the 7th in particular. So words aren't enough. We need to see the police taking more proactive action to identify plots targeting the Jewish community in advance, using enhanced surveillance powers that might ordinarily be used against terrorism or state threats. In addition to that, we need to see a lot more robust policing of the marches in London, where calls for jihad and intifada, I think, risk inflaming anti-Semitic hatred, because calls for jihad and intifada are calls for violence. if it turns out the perpetrators in this case are not British citizens, then I would like to see them, frankly, deported after they've served a very long prison sentence.
Yes, well, good luck with all of that. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, this is the issue, isn't it? When the Prime Minister says he's find this incident deeply shocking, I'm afraid that most people in Golders Green, and I know that area well, they don't find it deeply shocking at all. They've been waiting and watching us. Indeed, they sadly were not deeply shocked by, as you say, the Heaton Park attack, which left two members of that synagogue dead. But because we've seen, those marches on the streets, we've seen the hatred online, we've seen politicians, let's face it, rewarding Hamas in Gaza for their attack on October the 7th on Jewish people and Israelis with Palestinian recognition. And we've seen the coverage in the media, BBC, Sky and others, and the demonization of Israel, which is, again, driving an awful lot of this. Are we too far gone now? Is it just gone too far in this country now that we can't actually row this back?
No, I think it can be recontained if the government is prepared to take robust action. And that means, for example, if people in the UK who are not British citizens express anti-Semitism or support for violence or terrorism, they should be deported. We need to have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, where people do things like what happened here last night. They need to serve a very, very long time in prison. And as I said already, the police need to be more active. We need to be much less tolerant of hatred being expressed in some of these marches, including things like calls for jihad and intifada, which are expressly calls for violence. If we change our approach in that way, I do think this can be recontained, but it requires active and energetic action by the government and by the police.
Are you hopeful at all that action will be taken?
Well, look, I'm going to be in Parliament in just a couple of hours' time. We've got Home Office questions, and I'll be putting this to the Home Secretary. She is obviously in charge of policing, counter-terrorism, and I will be putting these points to her and pressing her to make sure this does happen as quickly as possible. OK, really good for you to join us. Shadow Home Secretary there, Chris Philp, joining us live from Golders Green, obviously, where they had that attack on that ambulance station. Benedict Spence still with me. Just give a reaction to that. I mean, I agree with an awful lot of what you said, apart from the fact I'm just not hopeful this government is going